Selectmen's meeting Tuesday, April 5th. Announcements first. I'll just talk a little about an event that occurred on Sunday in celebration of Bob Sperber. It was at the Teen Center, a moving event. I believe all of us were there. I didn't know all the things he was involved with and was part of the conception. Metco, SWS, Extended Day, BEEP, the EDCO, programs that evolved into the senior center. Quite a remarkable, and that was his Brookline career, and then he had a career after that at the BU, where he was a key person with the City of Chelsea Public School takeover.
Yeah, and then more recently, he helped the Archdiocese of Boston with the Catholic school programs, which,
Right.
you know, Bob is Jewish, but was willing to step in and work with them when they needed someone.
And got a very high award from
Yeah,
the
he did.
diocese.
He did, yeah.
Yeah, quite a remarkable man.
Hey, I'd like to add that the film that was shown there was a very, very well done film.
Yeah.
It just had him talking about his life, very simple. And it's available, I understand, at the Teen Center website.
Right.
And I'd encourage people to go there and watch it. It's a very,
Yeah.
very well done film.
Yeah.
I think Ann Turner has put it on YouTube.
Right,
I saw
yeah,
an email about that.
yeah, and it's accessible on the Teen Center website.
Right.
And we should mention, Chairman Wyszynski and I were at the Brookline Education Foundation event
Right.
Saturday night, and that was a big success. I think I don't know what the final numbers were, but I think they raised quite a bit of money. And they do some very good work, and they give grants to teachers to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do, some research during the summer, or, you know, all sorts of different programs. And you know, it's sometimes super valuable resource for our schools and our teachers, and the kids benefit from it ultimately.
So let me just
Selectman
mention
Heller?
that Climate Week was last week.
Right.
Mary Dewart organized fabulous events. I attended some of them. They were very inspiring on many different topics. Gas leaks, net metering. On Sunday afternoon, Bernard and I attended the last event, which featured Governor Dukakis talking about the political process of climate action, and it was fascinating. Of course, he's a fabulous speaker, and he did a really, really good job. So I'd just like to congratulate Climate Action Brookline and Mary Dewart on a very, very successful week. I also participated with my grandchildren in the youth adaptation climate action program, which was held on Saturday, and a lot of kids from all over town, all the way from kindergartners to high schoolers, did projects and presented them, and they were judged, and it was a very, very successful event. So Crystal Johnson was the primary mover on that one, and I would congratulate her as well. It was really a very, very good, very, very good. And all the events were very crowded. Lots of people from outside of Brookline too, from JP, from West Roxbury, from Newton. So they were heavily attended and very well received.
Yeah, if I may add one thing, sort of personal sort of perspective on this. Governor Dukakis, in a small piece of his presentation, said something that I think is really, really important. Not Brookline important, but sort of nationally important. He talked about the importance of getting us off of coal, especially. I mean, coal is a horrible polluter and creates huge amounts of problems. But he said that on the other side, what are we going to do with those people who work in the coal mines we can't just be cavalier and ignore their pain and the disruption of their lives when we take away their livelihood. And the answer is not just to ignore them, but rather to really fight for government intervention to provide jobs, retraining, and alternatives for them so that they're not left by the wayside. And I think from the standpoint of undermining some of the political demagoguery against climate change that we hear in this country, that's really an important point to make. And I really thank Governor Dukakis for having that type of insight, which we unfortunately don't hear a lot on the national scene.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It was quite an eventful week around
Very busy.
around town. I'll mention that Selectman Franco is in Washington this week and won't be joining us. I'll also mention Mr. Kleckner is feeling a little under the weather, so he may be walking in and out as the circumstances dictate. I don't think we have anyone signed up for public comment, so I'll move on to the miscellaneous calendar. The first is the question of approving a contract in the amount not to exceed $7,500 with Bryn McKinney for real estate counseling services in connection with the River Road Study Committee's analysis of potential redevelopment scenarios. Mr. Martineau.
Thank you. So this is a contract for real estate consulting services. This contract is funded in part as a combination of ED technical assistance dollars from this fiscal year and federal dollars available to us next fiscal year. This particular consultant has a proven track record working with the town and committees of this sort, providing a similar scope of services. She worked with the committee that worked on the Davis Path zoning, did some work with the Waldo Durgan committee back when they were meeting, and her services have really proven invaluable in helping committees of this type make informed decisions about any potential zoning changes, use changes. The committee has been meeting over the past several weeks to come up with some redevelopment scenarios, corresponding zoning criteria. We're fortunate to have a number of folks on the committee that are able to offer their professional expertise lends itself to advancing these scenarios to a point where they're pretty solid, but could benefit from an over-the-shoulder perspective from someone like Pam McKinney from Byrne McKinney. She has access to a wealth of information, and so really helps us make informed decisions about any potential changes that we might implement.
Yeah, I'll just say I worked with Ms. McKinney on the Brookline Place project, and she's a real valuable resource. That it's a good thing that we have the funds to be able to hire her, because she brings a perspective, a good financial analysis perspective.
And market analysis.
And, right. Any questions, comments?
I assume the contract has been vetted by town council?
It's an approved template that town council has advised us or has advised us to use in the past, and we always defer to the town's purchasing agent on anything. Dave Janakakis is my go-to before I send anything up here. So.
Great.
Okay, therefore, I'll move that we approve the contract in an amount not to exceed $7,500 with Bryn McKinney for real estate counseling services in connection with the River Road Study Committee's analysis of potential redevelopment scenarios. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Have a good night.
Thank you. The next item is a question of approving and executing a contract with Folan Waterproofing and Construction Company in the amount of $1,092,700 in connection with exterior wall repair projects in the schools. Mr. Masick.
Yes, this is a continuing appropriation for our building envelope roofing work. For this project, we received 7 bids, and Folan Waterproofing was the lowest and responsible bidder, as recommended by our engineer.
Have we used them before?
As a filed subbidder.
Comments, questions? You know what buildings are going to be worked on?
They'll be doing the Pierce Primary next door and the Baker School. And the UAB.
Will this be done over the summer?
Yes.
I did,
Yep.
I was looking at the supporting material here, and there was something about the Coolidge Corner Library repointing. Is that part of this contract?
No.
Okay. Because they're planning on doing something major
I think
there,
I
so
gave you my my cheat sheet for
Oh.
all the projects that were over the next few years.
Oh,
I
okay.
have a little cheat sheet
Yeah.
that I use.
Well, before we do anything on the Coolidge Corner Library, we need to figure out what they're, whether they're tearing down that building or not, you know.
We agree.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so therefore, I will move that we approve and execute the contract with Fallen Waterproofing Construction Company in the amount of $1,092,700 in connection with the exterior wall repair projects in the schools. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. You're up again, Mr. Mayor.
I am.
Question of approving and executing a contract with MDM Engineering in the amount of $514,900 in connection with roof and exterior wall repair projects on the town side.
Yes, we broke it up into two contracts, town and school side. And again, this is part of the continuing appropriation for building envelope and roof repair. For this project, we received 10 bids, and MDM Engineering was the lowest and responsible bidder. We have not worked with MDM Engineering in the past, but the engineer has.
The engineer, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
MDM Engineering is not a known entity to us,
Right.
but he is to Russo Bar, the engineer of record who put together the plans and
see.
specifications.
So which buildings does this cover?
Oh, this covers Sewell Rec, Gym, the Museum of Transportation, the Harry Downs Field House, the Lars Anderson Toilets, Electric Shop, Carpentry Shop, and Skating Pavilion.
Okay.
Oh, as well-
Question?
Oops, and the public safety, the small roof over at public safety.
Okay. Questions, comments? Therefore, I'll move that we approve and execute the contract with MDM Engineering in the amount of $514,900 in connection with roof and exterior wall repair projects on the town side. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you. And the next item is the question of approving the application of New England Treatment Access, doing business as Netta, holder of a registered marijuana dispensary license at 160 Washington Street for a change in manager, alternate manager as follows, from Amanda Rosatano, manager, to Amanda Rosatano, alternate manager, and Melanie Nash, alternate manager, to Melanie Nash, manager. Ms. Rosatano, welcome.
Good evening. Great to be back.
Tell
yeah.
us what's going on.
So we're here tonight to request your approval for Melanie to come on officially as our manager of record. This is consistent with how we rolled out our Northampton opening, whereas myself as director of operations was consistently at the store in a managerial role, working with our manager recruit to get her up to speed until we were ready to sort of turn the operation over. Melanie has been with us for 3 months now, since prior to opening Brookline, and was played a huge role in helping us roll out the opening successfully. She's been working with me to manage the team there. Melanie has extensive retail management experience, understands the unique situation we're in here in town in terms of the compliance elements, what we need to do to ensure that we're meeting all of those elements, and just really the whole sensitivity around sort of our existence in town and making sure that we're really, really careful about how we're doing business and thoughtful about how we're running our operation. I feel very confident that she's ready to take over that role. That doesn't mean that I won't be at the store anymore. In fact, my office is at the store. It's just a matter of me being able to work in the capacity that I should be working in, which is overseeing all of our locations. With that, I'll turn it over to any questions you may have for me or Melanie.
Why don't you just, how are things going from your perspective?
From my perspective, things are going really well. We've heard very consistently from your town departments that they've had no complaints. That's from the health department, the police department. As you know, we do have a police detail on site, and we've heard nothing but positive reports from the police. We haven't had any major issues with parking or traffic or any of the things that we thought, may have been a concern. It's been handled, I think, very well. We do, in addition to the police detail, we still have a parking attendant on, so our parking lot is more than adequately monitored on a daily basis. I know that was sort of one of the bigger concerns of the folks here in town, is how we're managing traffic and volume. And now we're off of appointments. We're no longer on the appointment-only model, and it really has sort of self-regulated in terms of patient volume.
What is the patient volume?
We're seeing about 200 patients a day on average.
And the average appointment time, or the average time?
I'd say about 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah,
And that's different depending on the patient. Some folks require a lot more time, and we want to make sure that we have the capacity to do that for people.
So have you had lines, people waiting for?
Not outside of the facility. Yeah, we sometimes will have a little bit of a lineup inside, but nothing extensive. We have adequate seating. We have a couple of different options for patients, whether it be, there's an express option for folks who kind of know what they want, so that they can come in, place an order, and sit down and wait for that to be ready, as opposed to standing in line and interacting with somebody at the point of sale. So we're really dialing it in now, but it's going really well.
I'll report that I was at a neighborhood meeting, Brookline Neighborhood Association, and the topic of NETA came up, and the report I heard was things are going smooth.
Great to hear.
And these were from some folks who were involved in opposing the license. So that's, I was very glad to hear that. It's been my impression, I go by the site multiple times a day, that at least externally, that I could see, things seem to be going along smoothly. I haven't seen any impact on the neighborhood that I could ascertain. It was my hope that you guys would open and we wouldn't hear anything, and that seems to be the case.
That was our hope as well.
I'll just make one more comment. When Chairman Wyszynski and I toured the facility, we learned that you had developed a brochure about parking and transportation to the site. And I think that was a very excellent move on your part. You identified parking for people, lots, one Brookline Place, and two other lots. Frankly, I didn't even know one of the other ones existed. And I think that that's been important in terms of making sure that your teeny tiny parking lot is not overloaded. And the neighborhood is not feeling an impact. So I think that's really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also had the opportunity just last week, I think it was, to visit your facility. One of the things that I was told was that your sort of typical age group or typical client is more elderly than younger, which I find interesting, and maybe a sign that we're really providing a service to people who really need it, as opposed to some of the concerns that people had during the hearings. So.
Yeah, in fact, I actually just asked for some updated statistics on things such as the average age, but as of the last time we looked at that, the average age of our patients was 47. 25% of our patients are over 65 years old. And interestingly, our oldest patient is 95 years old.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Okay. Any other comments, questions? You're getting off easy, Melanie.
I just was amazed that you'd managed to recruit somebody who'd gone to graduate school in Honolulu to live in our climate. And
Well, I'm from Syracuse, New York.
She also, I see, has a certificate in Chinese business, so she has the skills that enable her to work in a Brookline environment of business.
Okay, therefore, I'll move that we approve the application of New England Treatment Access doing business as Netta, holder of a registered marijuana dispensary license at 160 Washington Street, for a change in manager, alternate manager as follows: Amanda Rosatano, manager 2, Amanda Rosatano is alternate manager, and Melanie Nash, alternate manager, to Melanie Nash, manager. Got it out. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Can I state one, excuse me. My comment about your certificate in Chinese business related to the fact that doing business in Brookline is difficult, similar to doing business in any foreign country. I don't want to be misunderstood with that comment.
I picked up on that.
In fact,
Thank
I think
you,
it's much
Selectman
easier here than in China from when I was there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. And we have two temporary licenses, and I'll move them in omnibus fashion. First is, I'll move that we, and I'll note for the record that the police department has reviewed both of the applications, and they find that they're in order. I'll move that we grant a temporary wine and malt beverage license to Lars Anderson Auto Museum in connection with a Dancing with the Cars Museum Series to be held April 8th from 6:30 to 11 p.m. at 15 Newton Street. And I'll also move that we grant a temporary wine and malt beverage license to the Lincoln School PTO in connection with a trivia night to be held on April 9th from 6 to 11:30 in the Lincoln School cafeteria at 19 Kennard Road. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. And the final item, miscellaneous item, is a question of approving a transfer of $7,200 from the BAA Trust Fund account to the Arts Council Matching Grants account. Mr. Faison.
Good evening. Austin Faison,
He did it. He
Assistant
did
Town
it.
Administrator. He did. I appreciate that. So there's a yearly transfer from the BAA Trust Fund account to the Arts Council Matching Grants account for $7,200. In the past, Melissa Goff has requested this transfer a little bit earlier in the year, but we're getting it in so they can get their bills paid.
Questions? This seems to be a pretty routine kind of thing. Therefore, I'll move that we approve the transfer of $7,200 from the BAA Trust Fund account to the Arts Council Matching Grants account. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our main calendar. And we have a crowd coming in. And it's the question of authorizing the promotions of the following firefighters to the position of lieutenant in the fire department: Stephen O'Connor, Daniel Tehan, and Walter Francis. Chief Ford.
Good evening. How was everyone this night? Nice
Okay.
night. I'm going to let everybody filter in if I could. They're
That's fine.
congregating outside. Well, it's my pleasure to be here before you again this evening, as I have in the past, to do some promotions, or ask you to make some promotions. And you know, this is one of the nights I enjoy. I'm not sure promotions versus new hires, which is better. They're both pretty exciting from my point of view. It's nice to see individuals, members that work hard, study, put in the time, and they really earn these promotions. It's not only the member themselves, as I told you before, it's also the family. Families have to put up with a lot, their time away from home, time studying. I think sometimes my wife liked it when I wasn't home studying, but it's a lot of work on the family. So these promotions are not just for the members themselves. They are well earned by all. As you know, before you, we have a vacancy and two anticipated vacancies. We interviewed several candidates on the list, remaining on the list, and we came up with these three individuals that we highly recommend for promotion. I'm certain that all three of them will make excellent lieutenants. I'd like Chief of Operations, Chief Ward, to speak for a moment with you, and he's going to tell you a little bit about each of the individuals.
Good evening. I don't want to tell you everything about these guys. It would take too long, and there's some spicy stories, but I'll get right into it. Steve O'Connor can't make it. He's down in Washington, D.C. at some union business that he's probably going to use against us in the future. But Steve's a graduate of Brookline High. He joined the department in February of 2006. He has a bachelor's degree from UMass Amherst. Steve received his EMT certification in 2008. He's been working on and off as a temporary lieutenant since 2014, and Steve is following in his father's footsteps, who also served as a lieutenant in the Brookline Fire Department. Our second candidate is Dan Tian, who's here with his family. Dan, also a graduate of Brookline High School. He joined the department in November of 2004. Dan has a commendation from an incident in 2008 for an outstanding performance during an auto fire where there was numerous people trapped. He's an EMT and earned his firefighter 1-2 certification in 2015. Dan has been working as a temporary lieutenant since 2015, and Dan's brother is a captain on the Brookline Fire Department. You can see the trend here. And then we have Walt Francis. Walt originally joined the department in 2004, coming over from the Springfield Fire Department. After leaving for a few months, he realized how amazing the Brookline Fire Department was, and he came running back. Walt is an EMT and has both his firefighter 1-2 certification and his fire instructor 1 certification. Walter's father was a firefighter on the Springfield Fire Department. These are the three names that Chief Ward and I are putting forward for you tonight.
Okay. We have three legacies. Well, I'll first say congratulations and welcome especially to the families who have to put up with their loved ones not being around in the evenings and at night, long hours and uncertain hours. So it's great having you here. And you know that Brookline counts on these men to help them out and be first responders whenever something happens, and we're proud of them as you are. Selectman Daley?
Well, I just want to say, we think we have an excellent fire department, and these guys sound like they are right in the mold of the kind of officers we like so delighted to welcome you all, and congratulations.
And I'll just add, thank you to the chief and to Deputy Chief Ward for bringing these names forward. We did see Officer Francis not long ago, and we're sorry we had snow yesterday and reminded you of your former home, but we'll try to do better in the future. But we welcome you back, and we're glad to see that you're getting this promotion, as well as the other gentlemen with you. So thank you for coming, and thank you for doing the job you do.
Well, I echo all those sentiments. Like Selectman Heller, I remember Fireman Francis here just a few weeks ago, and you've zoomed up to this promotion. So you must be, and the rest of the firefighters must be highly regarded by the chief and the department. So I congratulate all of you, and thank your families for putting up with the difficult and actually dangerous work that you sometimes do, but that do here in Brookline very professionally and very well. So congratulations.
Okay. Yeah. So I will move that we authorize the promotions of the following firefighters to the position of lieutenant in the fire department.
Effective tomorrow,
Effective tomorrow.
April 6th.
Okay. Stephen O'Connor, Daniel Tehan, and Walter Francis. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. You
Thank
are
you
now
very much.
promoted.
If you guys would come up, we can get some pictures with the selectmen, with your families, pinning badges. You've got 3 minutes, go. There's police officers over there that want up their turn, and they have guns. Everybody this way.
It's exciting.
So, 1 and 1? That's good. Smile, guys. This way. This way.
That's too bad. Yeah.
Thank you.
Get back here now.
We gotta move this along. So I guess I always find it, whenever we have a promotion, always wondering, how do you follow that? Well, I guess we're going to do it again.
Yeah.
This time we have police, some promotions in the police department, and this is the question of authorizing the following promotions within the police department. Lieutenant Stephen Burke to Deputy Superintendent, Sergeant Thomas Ward to Lieutenant, and Patrol Officer David Hill to Sergeant.
Good evening. We just get a little bit
Chief
put together here.
Leary.
There's just a couple more people coming in. Well, good evening. It's a very good day for the Brookline Police Department, and I just want to talk a little bit about the process that these three officers went through and kind of how we treat people that are seeking promotion within the department. But what got us here today is we had a longtime officer of us, John O'Leary, who was the Deputy Superintendent in charge of detectives, retired after 36 years on the police department. He retired in March, the end of March, March 31st of this year, which created the openings that we seek to fill tonight. And the officers that we have before you tonight, I think truly represent the quality of workers that we have inside the police department, and just the quality of people that we try to hire and try to present to the board for promotion. The process that I've gone through to get here is time-consuming, to say the least, but I think it's also stressful. But it's a good thing for the department to go through, because speaking for the three candidates that are in front of you tonight, they went through an awful lot of competition to get to the seats that they're in tonight and to get their recommendations. And it wasn't without a lot of effort on their part, whether it was time away from families to study, whether it was to sit and take that test, whether it was to prep for their interviews with us. all that stuff adds up to, I think, a lot of angst on their part. And, but the process as it goes through, the way we look at it as a department is that we go beyond the formal part of it. We really take a look at what an officer has done through his or her career and what they're going to mean to the department in their current position, and also if the opportunity presents itself to get to the next level. And I think we try to set that tone when we make our promotions all the way through. And I think what you're going to see here tonight and here are some quality people that have done some really good work for the department, with a lot of good work yet to come. So I'd like to start with Steve Burke. Steve is a lieutenant with us. He joined our department in April of 1983. As a patrol officer, he served in various assignments until June of 1989, when he was selected to go in detectives. He was promoted to sergeant 2 years later, and he was assigned to the patrol division. In May of 1995, he was promoted to lieutenant, and quickly after that, he was appointed to our internal affairs unit, where he was the lieutenant in charge of internal affairs for just a little bit over 12 years. In 2011, he transferred to the day detectives, and he assumed a new role after being in internal affairs. But during his time in internal affairs, he really changed the outlook of that department, changed on how we handle citizen complaints and also internal investigative complaints. But he was also the ranking officer in charge of our accreditation process. And he took us from the very beginning to the very end in the journey to achieve accreditation, which we did in 2013. A lot of that credit goes to Steve. When he was moved into detectives, into the lieutenant's position, he assumed responsibility for the Superior Court. And I think a little bit more than that, he oversaw our intelligence, but he also took care of our liaison with a lot of the federal agencies that we deal with. Just recently, he was our officer on scene that was in charge up in South Brookline when Hillary Clinton came to do a fundraiser up in one of the homes up there. He is a graduate of Brookline High School. He attains his bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Northeastern, his master's degree from Anna Maria College. He's a graduate of the Senior Management Institute for Police, which is taught by the Police Executive Research Forum. Lieutenant Burke and his wife, Jane, live in Westwood with their family. Their family is here tonight, and it's an honor to present him as the candidate for Deputy Superintendent. Next, we have Sergeant Thomas Ward. I'm recommending him for promotion to lieutenant. Tom Ward joined the department in April of 1983. Upon graduation from the police academy, he was assigned to the patrol division, where he worked in a variety of assignments, all while on the night shift. In April of 1988, he was assigned to the detective division, and while in this division, he served in a variety of roles, both inside our department and in assignments with both the Boston Police Department and the FBI. In August of 1997, he was promoted to sergeant, returned to patrol working nights. He remained in patrol with the exception of a short period of time where he served as our identification officer and one of our day detective supervisors. Shortly after that, he was again selected to go back in detectives, where he serves, as he currently does today, as our day supervisor. In this position, he has managed complex criminal investigation. He was one of the founding supervisors of our department's special response team. And as you, I'm sure, have remembered back a little bit more than 2 months ago, we had a vicious stabbing and shooting with three people severely injured. Sergeant Ward spearheaded that investigation, followed it through. About 2 weeks ago, the 3 subjects that we have under arrest all were indicted in Superior Court, and they're all being held pending trial, which is a great investigation that he's done, and he assured me that when more evidence is developed, which he said is coming pretty soon, we'll have the 4th subject in custody. So I haven't forgotten that promise from him. So he's a graduate of Brookline High School. He received his bachelor's degree in law enforcement, and his master's degree in criminal justice from Western New England College, and he lives in Westwood with his wife Lisa and their family, and they're here tonight as well, taking up the whole role. Yeah. Our third candidate is Patrol Officer Dave Hill for his promotion to sergeant. I do want to speak for just a minute on Dave Hill, because he represents a younger generation, and a younger generation, and I mean that in a good way. I think that as supervisors, one of the most enjoyable things we see on the job is when we hire a young person and then see a young person as they progress through their career and see them mature, both as a person, but also as a police officer, and they develop a way to kind of hone their leadership skills and present themselves as real leaders in the department. And I've watched Dave's development, and the superintendent has watched it as well, to the point where he's gotten himself in a position to be promoted on 3 different occasions. And the first 2, he just didn't get it because of the numbers game. This time he came in, he really excelled in his interview, and we're very happy to recommend him for promotion here tonight. He was selected to join our department in 2008, and upon graduating from the academy, he was assigned to patrol, where he has worked in various assignments and shifts. He's received a number of commendations for excellent police work, and he's done a lot of very good work for us. And I do want to talk about one incident, because one of the things we look at for promotions is when somebody volunteers for a special assignment, somebody volunteers to take on something extra, and David did that. He volunteered to get on a hostage negotiation, crisis negotiation team. And in 2014, in December, there was a resident of town that had called his family and said he wanted to end his life. He went up to the roof of a building on Beacon Street, that was 15 floors, and he got out onto the roof. He went over by the fencing area, that all it was is like 1 or 2 steps from a certain death. And David was one of the negotiators that responded to that call and talked to him. Well, it was a cold night. They spent 2 hours on the roof talking to this individual. Got him to climb back, got him to come back, got him to walk down. They took him to the hospital. David stayed with the family. And it was a good ending to what could have been a real tragic situation, but that's the type of work that he does for us. I think he got recognized by a lot of his officers, his fellow officers, that this past year he got voted as union president, and he's going to represent the union as we go forward. He's a graduate of Newton South High School and obtained his bachelor's degree from UMass Amherst. He resides in West Roxbury with his wife Ann and daughter. They're here tonight together with his mother and father. And on a more personal note, David would be our first officer of Asian descent to get promoted to the rank of sergeant, or as a supervising officer as well, for the Brookline Police Department. So it's quite a credit to him. So those are the 3 officers that I'd like to present in front of the board, and I hope that you'll agree with me and vote them their promotions. Thank you.
Okay. Congratulations on this achievement. And, you know, the Brookline Police Department is held in the highest esteem in the region, and we know that you'll carry on that tradition. And the community expects that when they call 911 that they get a professional, fast response, and you always achieve that, and we know that'll continue. And really, the incidents that the chief just described are just exemplary of that, and how in the time of need the community comes together and watches really in awe of what you guys do. So congratulations, and congratulations to the families of these officers, because you guys suffer the brunt of this too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have been astonished at how quickly our department has solved some of the cases that have happened here in Brookline. And sometimes cases that other departments couldn't solve. And, you know, then they step over the line and right away you guys are on them. And it sounds like each of the officers who's up for promotion has played a role in some of those cases that were solved so expeditiously. So I join in the congratulations and welcome you to your new roles in the department.
I second everything Selectman Waschinsky and Daley said. I'll also add, we'll forgive you, Officer Hill, for coming from Newton. But we can see that, you know, you've worked hard, and that's what counts. And we're happy we have BHS graduates. That's always a real big plus for us. And we're pleased that you're getting these promotions. Thank you for all your hard work.
First, I'd like to sort of congratulate or thank the chief for recruiting, you know, years ago from Brookline High School. I mean, we really need to see Brookline High School as a source for police, firemen, and others in town. I think that really strengthens our town, as well as provides us with some excellent people to work for us. Patrol Officer Hill and I actually met last week at the training program that you ran. And, you know, I had a very brief conversation with him and found him to be a very, you know, a good person that we would, you know, type of person we want on the force. Despite the fact of his high school, you know, graduation in Newton, I don't hold that against you at all, at all. I've met Lieutenant Burke also in a strange sort of way. He prepared or rewrote the policies and procedures, and I actually asked for a copy of those policies, and I got a book like this thick, and I did not read the whole thing, but I read through a lot of it, and I was very impressed with the way the policies were written and the content, the subjects that were covered and how they are covered. Made me a little more comfortable that, you know, at least we have the sort of structure for an excellent police department that will continue to do Brookline proud. I don't have anything to say about Sergeant Ward, but I'm sure you're a fine person.
Okay, I'm going to move that we authorize the following promotions within the police department. Lieutenant Stephen Burke to Deputy Superintendent, Sergeant Thomas Ward to Lieutenant, and Patrol Officer David Hill to Sergeant. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Why don't you come up and take some pictures? And
Do you guys want to get?
relation, right?
Yeah, first cousin.
From that, came on the job with me in '83. A lot of good work, a lot of crime. Crime's down 50% in the last 15 years. Back in the 80s,
Made me that stat.
well, crime named down. But me and Tom came out of the crime rate was a lot higher, a lot more crime out there. We both worked in Texas at the same time. We had a great detective lieutenant. So.
That's David's wife. This is his mother and father. It's Tom's wife. And Stevie Burke's kids over there.
Yeah, the problem with doing it at the same time as the fire is they kind of steal each other's thunder.
These three have to find
Really? That's when the paycheck comes.
I saw that on Facebook. What is that? It's for real.
Can I get the promotees, please?
Join the crowd. I didn't know why he was here, but now
You got the flu now? Is it the flu?
Feels like it.
Yeah, I heard the flu is around again.
Yeah, I don't see anyone here for it, but Yeah, no, I do. Just to. Right. Yeah, we're missing one.
Yeah.
Next week, probably, next week. Great, thank you.
Okay. Okay,
Just tell them we have to.
we're getting ready for the next item on the agenda.
Can we ask you guys to take the talking outside?
Okay, well. Yeah, I'll stay. Yeah, I'll give him. We'll see if he wants to.
I think we just have to start.
Yeah. Okay, the next item on the agenda is discussion of a townwide meter rate increase as recommended by the Transportation Board. I'll note that we're not going to vote tonight. We'll just let the officers meander out. Okay, we're almost there.
Let's just go.
Yeah.
Just go.
Okay, I'm going to note especially, we're not going to vote on the parking meter rate increase as originally noticed on our calendar. We're going to have a public hearing to hear comments from the public, if there are any. What are we thinking, next week or the week after? Next week?
Probably next week.
Probably next week. It'll be on our calendar. But tonight, I just want to have a discussion of the meter rates. Mr. Faison.
Good evening, again. Unfortunately, I'm not getting promoted. So the initial discussion that we're having right now is concerning the Transportation Board's approval of different types of meter rate increases. Todd Corain, the Transportation Administrator, provided a memo.
And I'll just note, he had a family emergency, so he's not with us tonight.
He did, and there are multiple parts to the increase, but there are generally, the increase is going to be from $1 to $1.25 per hour. That's the most overarching increase that would be happening, and then expanding some meter hours and things of the like. All of this has been assumed in the some of the override study committee implications for the budget, and there are I have a whole bunch of data if there's specific questions that you all have, but we have a projected impact of around 850,000 that we think is a pretty good estimate for what would change year over year from the increase. And that's not increase in citation numbers or anything like that. That's solely increase in parking meter receipts. But that's basically
I'm sorry, what was your projected increase?
850,000.
Okay.
And that's assumed in the FY17 budget as well. And later on tonight, DPW will be here, and Andy could speak to anything concerning that as well.
And this was part of the override discussion and the 850 was assumed as part of the override financing package to balance the books. And this was being done, we were trying to balance the different sources of revenue, and this was one way to reduce the tax increase by assuming a parking meter rate increase. This has been, I know the Chamber of Commerce has been told about this, and
Yes, the Chamber of Commerce has already weighed in on this with the Transportation Board and also in a letter directed to Town Administrator Kleckner. They are on board with it. There are some things they would like us to look into in the future as well, but they're on board with meter rate increase as well as the pay-by-cell technology, which is the next item.
that's the next item on the agenda. So
I have some questions. I don't know if you can answer this, or perhaps Mr. Dreisen can answer it. What are the comparable, like, okay, what is Boston charging and other communities around? Does this put us over everybody else, or are we still?
It doesn't put us over everyone else. In Boston, in certain areas, it's $1.25. They also do different rate type of things for events in the areas that they can do that. In Somerville, it's $1 an hour. It can be anywhere in the region right now between 75 cents and $2 per hour.
Newton, I think, is less, is on the lower end.
I would have to get back to you with that information, with that specific
this?
note.
You'd have to come to the microphone, yeah.
This is a surprise. I wasn't just come in here. Listen. Gus Dreesen, Transportation Board. As far as I know and what my recollection is from when we had the hearing, I thought that Todd told us that the City of Cambridge, that we are matching the City of Cambridge as well as the City of Boston with respect to that $1.25. And I believe also one of the elements was not so much the rate, but also the expansion going from 6 o'clock until 8 o'clock in certain areas, because that's also part of this too.
I think that expansion has already happened, I believe, along Beacon Street, anyway.
Well, some areas of our town are 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I thought, and again, my documentation, just go by memory. I thought that the intent was to expand on that because, particularly in the commercial areas, it matches what other cities do around us.
yeah, then I see there are some adjustments to some let's see, the town hall lot is going to 8 o'clock, whereas before it stopped at 6. The School Street lot across the street is going to 8 o'clock. But then there are some extensions of allowed parking time, like Center Street East will go from 3 to 4 hours. Fuller Street over at JFK Crossing will go from 3 to 4 hours. And then in some of the median areas along Beacon Street will go to 2 to 3 hours. So those will be posted. I think those changes have received a little less publicity. And part of this too is changing the meter. Some of the older meter heads are going to be changed to the meter heads accepting credit cards.
So that's built into the FY17 budget as well. They are what we call smart meters, where someone can use a credit card at. They are also can be controlled centrally. So the older meters, people who empty them need to physically audit every single one. So what they do is they put a little computer chip into it, and it dumps all the data into it at one time. So you never really know how frequently the spot is occupied. You only have a total amount of money since the last time you collected. With these smart meters, in real time, we can have an understanding of how much was paid. If someone is disputing that they paid for parking when they received a ticket, you can go back and actually look up their credit card and see if that spot, if they had paid for the correct spot and things like that. So the smart meters are significantly easier to manage. And with things like changing the rate, you can centrally do that. We can, if this is approved, the next day, we can turn that on. So the older meters, we'd have to go and touch every single meter and change them. So they were collecting money.
So now the people giving out tickets are going to know if you came back and put an extra quarter in, so you actually stayed more than your 2 hours, right?
Not so much with a quarter, but if you load up your credit card.
Yeah, there's different ways to do like that maximum allowable parking type of thing. To try to get a little bit better enforcement.
Selectman Green.
Yeah, I have one question with the cell phone technology. I assume that in the future you would have the ability to know exactly when the time has expired and ticket at that moment. Okay, I would hope that you come back to the board with that, because I just have a real creepy feeling about that.
Sure. So I can hop, do you want me to hop into the cell phone technology stuff too?
Sure, why not?
All right, since so with the cell phone technology.
Before you go there, could
sure.
I just ask one question?
Absolutely.
Right now, as I recall, when you use a credit card in the meters that we have that accept credit cards, there is a limit, there is a floor of how much you can charge. I mean, you have to charge, you can't just charge 50 cents, you have to charge $1, is that correct?
So it's set up that it initially shows $1, but there isn't a floor to how much to be charged. So someone could conceivably put 25 cents onto it and utilize that.
Okay, well, I've been cheated.
But I think you and I were talking about the Passport, the company that's going to be handling
Yeah.
these credit card transactions, and there's going to be 35 cents per transaction. Is that right? Part of which goes to the town of Brookline, and 15 cents of which goes to Passport. So if you just put 25 cents on, you're going to pay an additional 35 cents.
So you're going to pay a user fee?
Yes.
But that's only the cell, right?
That's only the cell.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yes.
Let's
So,
not mix
okay.
apples.
Never use the
Sorry,
cell.
sorry.
All right, so
Let's
different-
just finish.
Sure.
Let's just finish the rate discussion. We're going to have a public hearing on it, so there's more to come. I wanted to have a public hearing before we voted it, just so we make sure that we hear from the public and concerns that we hear are taken care of. Any other questions, comments, discussion? Now you're on.
Okay, so in order, concerning the enforcement, based off of that,
We're talking about,
the pay by cell technology.
so,
Sure.
start at the beginning.
I will start at the beginning. So the contract in front of you is a software license and service agreement with a company called Passport Parking. People who have parked in Boston in the last year, there's a system called Park Boston, an app that was built by Passport Parking. What it does is it allows you to utilize your cell phone and pay for parking through an app. It isn't necessitated that you have to utilize an app. You could go to a website with it, and you can potentially text or call a number as well. So we're not saying that you have to use the app and have to have a smartphone. There are other ways to augment this system as well. It is a very easy to use system. And the way that it will be implemented in Brookline is you will be paying for your individual spot. So Brookline as a whole will be a zone within the system. So you will put in a zone number and a spot number, and you're paying for that spot. That's a little different than what Boston has right now, because Boston, you pay by your license plate, and that's not how we enforce in Brookline. We enforce by the spot. So that's how the technology will be implemented. Concerning the fees that were brought up previously, this will be the first instance of the town passing a portion of credit card fees onto the users as a convenience fee. So your transaction, if you were to buy $1 of parking, or an hour of parking at the current rate of $1, you would be charged the $1, and you would be charged an additional 35-cent convenient fee. 15 cents of that convenience fee would go to Passport. That's how we pay them, and that's why they're in this, to work with us. And the additional 20 cents would come to the town, and we would utilize that to offset some of the credit card fees. The usual credit card fee for each transaction, which is, they refer to them as microtransactions, is between 32 and 35 cents per transaction. So as we're adding more transactions on the town, we're looking for ways to augment those fees.
So you're saying you could go to a meter and use your credit card directly?
Yeah.
Stick your credit card in it, and you wouldn't be charged that fee. But if you use your phone and this Passport system, you would be charged that fee?
For right now, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And in Selectman Heller's example, where she wants to put that quarter in the meter, it's gonna cost us 35 cents in fees, so we're gonna be paying her to park?
In that instance,
Well, that makes
Yes.
no sense. I'm wondering also about, you want to try to limit people to park in a space. If it's a 2-hour space, you want to limit it. What happens if somebody goes and puts, however many 10 quarters or whatever they need, 12 quarters for the 2 hours, and then they're, having dinner in a restaurant, and they call up on their cell phone and they add more time or something? How are you going to be able to enforce the 2-hour limit?
so there's different ways to do that. In the way that was done in the past was marking tires with chalk. You would basically mark a tire as they went by, and then if that same car was in that same spot with the mark on it, you would give them a ticket. The way you can do that now with these different technologies is that if Town Administrator Kleckner were to pay for 2 hours, and then he was out at dinner and tried to pay for another 2 hours, 5 minutes after his meter expired, we can set business rules in that to prevent that from happening. Your example of paying cash and then utilizing the app would be a little tricky. I think Todd would probably have a better idea about how this would be enforced in the future, but those are all things that the parking enforcement officers would be instructed upon, how to best limit overuse of parking spaces.
I think, though, Chairman Waschinsky's raising a good point. We have to think about whether we want to let people use credit cards and not pay any fee. Because I think people are going to assume if there's a fee for the phone app, there's a fee for the credit card.
So that's
And-
why I said it opens the discussion in terms of passing along the fees to the consumers. On the example of using the credit card at the meter, I would just want to confirm with Todd concerning what the bottom limit is. We could set that with just how we can set anything with those smarter meters to make it so you have to buy $1 or an hour's worth of time, so that there's never an instance of that. I'm confident that there isn't a bottom limit for it, but I can do my due diligence and check with Todd about that bottom limit. But in fiscal 17's budget, that was one of the things that we did, was we consolidated all of the credit card fees because it's, at this point, hundreds of thousands of dollars across all town departments that are collecting credit card fees, that the town is, or not collecting credit card fees, utilizing credit cards as payment methods, that the town is essentially paying for those additional fees right now. So it's something that this is the potential first step in looking at all of the credit card charges
I
that we
do
have.
believe that if you use a credit card in a meter in Boston, the user is paying a small fee for the privilege of using the credit card.
We should check that out.
Yeah, I don't think that's true unless you use a debit card.
So
I mean, I use credit cards in Boston all the
The
time.
thing is, though, I think there's a little bit of a problem with instituting a new system and then 6 months later saying, oh, and now you've gotten used to using your credit card, and now, by the way, it's your credit card plus this fee. So I think we would be wise to think about it right at the outset, and,
Yeah, well, the fee, we're instituting the fee from day one on the cell,
yes.
but
So I'm saying that maybe we should be thinking about doing it on the credit cards, too.
right,
Yeah.
directly on the meter.
yeah, so
Can I just ask,
absolutely.
so, did I hear correctly? You said that if people use quarters, they're going to pay a fee too?
No.
No.
Okay.
No, this is only talking about credit card transactions. And then in terms of, like I said, this is opening the door to looking at the credit card fees and passing them along to the consumer. In my previous job in Somerville, we implemented the exact same technology. The way that we discussed it with the public was that it was a convenience fee for using the app. The app is significantly easier. You don't have to actually interact with the meter at all, as long as you know what spot, which will be clearly marked on the meter. You can basically put it into your phone and go along your way. And you can even set it up to send you alerts when your time is running out at your meter and things like that. So it was.
You're way better at working your smartphone than I am working mine.
It's
I wouldn't
it's-
be able to do all that, but.
It's a pretty straightforward system that is becoming relatively commonplace in a lot of the country now. San Francisco did a big study on it called SF Park that was about a whole bunch of different things, but the app that they used was very similar to the Passport app.
So the headline is Brookline is coming into the 21st century with its parking technology, and you're going to be able to use your pay by smartphone. And when do we expect this to happen?
Cambridge is actually implementing in May, so depending on when the contract is signed with Passport, if it is signed, we're looking at a middle of the summer rollout. And the rollout is can happen pretty quickly. It's getting stickers on meters to affix the zone and spot numbers to them, and adding in some additional signage and stuff like that so people know it's available. But it's a pretty quick turnaround.
So are the meters, this is getting into the weeds, every meter is going to be numbered, and then is the number going to be visible from the street, so you can just get out of your car, you look, you punch it into or you can have to go onto the sidewalk?
So sadly, I know this because I put tons of stickers on meters in Somerville doing the same thing. You put them on the car side of the meter, so they're street facing, so that you can basically see
Okay.
it from your car. The idea is that you can see it from your car and do it from inside
So
of
if
your
it's
car.
raining, you're in your car, you punch your number in, you put your cell phone in your pocket, and you run out and get your umbrella?
Yes.
Okay. And you're done?
Yes. So going back to
Although I always get out, well, because I'm using quarters, I get out and walk around to the other side and, look at what the hours are and put my quarters in. And so I wouldn't have that information on the inside, the sidewalk side.
Well, you're going to have to put the quarters in, so you're going to have to physically go to the meter.
No, but I might, say, oh my gosh, I don't have enough quarters. Oh, interesting, I can use my cell phone,
we could potentially ask for
Some of us are probably slower adopters
we
than
could
others.
ask for a second set of stickers, so we could put them on both sides of the meter potentially. But that would kind of be if it was necessary, I think.
Well, I will note that this contract says that if we don't launch at a certain time, and I don't see the effective date.
Because that's not entered.
Have to be very careful if they're busy doing Cambridge and we're not quite ready with our meters or stickers, that how we set that effective date.
Sure.
Because we have to start paying them,
Oh, they pay, the provider pays.
that we are the provider.
Oh, we're the
This is what
provider.
I went through this earlier with Austin.
Did you get updated versions of this?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. We are the provider.
Now, I noticed that if we don't, if the system doesn't generate sufficient fees, we're going to owe them money. There's a monthly minimum. If total per transaction fees paid to passport during any month are less than the monthly minimum, the provider will pay the difference, and we're the provider.
Yes, that is the case.
So what are we on the hook for here?
I would
So
have-
there's an incentive for us to
Push,
publicize
yes.
this.
Absolutely, and Passport would work with us in publicizing that. I would have to circle back with Todd.
So if everybody still keeps putting in quarters, then we're gonna owe, and there's no cell phone use, then we're gonna, are limited.
Yeah, but as of right now, in the past few months, if we were even to get 10% of our transactions, we would easily meet what their minimums are. So we won't really have an issue of
Do
that.
we have, oh, I'm sorry.
All the young people will go for it first, probably.
Yeah.
Right.
Do we have a marketing plan?
I'm not.
So what we would do in conjunction with the companies, they have what's called street teams, and they'll go out to the busiest areas during the busiest times. So they would be in Coolidge Corner on a weekend, for example. They would be in Brookline Village, and Washington Square, a night where more stuff is going on. They would help us publicize it, and then we would be purchasing ads in the tab and things like that, and putting it on social media and stuff like that. The more you can actually have people interact with it online, and you can push them right through the app, to the app, the easier it will be. But this is also, again, Passport is taking a very regional approach. Unfortunately, when I was in Somerville, we acquired the same technology from a company called Park Mobile, which we thought was going to be the company that got the region. They didn't. Passport did. So this app you will be able to use in Newton, in Boston, in Cambridge. You'll be able to use the same app everywhere. So that was always kind of the goal of the parking council that's in the area, of getting everyone on a similar technology, so that no matter where you are, you can utilize the same pay-by-cell technology and pay for your parking and make it easier.
Cool.
So one thing I wanted to circle back on was Selectman Green's comment in terms of enforcement. The way those handhelds that they have interact with it, they would have to request information about a spot instead of proactively being informed about a spot. So if you paid for it by your cell phone and it ran out, it's not going to send an alert to the parking control officer to go ticket at a certain spot.
Not this year.
Not this year. Instead, when they came to your spot, if it was the older parking technology where there's no indication if the meter had been paid or not, they would then go into their handheld and look up that spot and see if it had been paid or not, and that would be pushed through to them. So they would have to inquire about those spots. So they can't proactively go out and ticket the second that you're.
Yeah, my only concern is, if they had that capability, and I assume that eventually they will, that we need to give people at least a grace period of 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my only concern. I mean,
Yeah,
we can wring every last penny out of every last citizen in town, but maybe that's not the policy we should follow.
Yeah, that's a ways off, though. So we'd have to have some very fast and excitable parking control officers to try to push something like that along.
Well, I'm excited about this, so I think we should kind of have a little splash when we roll this out. So let's think about how to do a splash, because we want people to use it, And if it's the same app as Boston and Newton, it can, it makes it just a heck of a lot easier for everybody.
Absolutely. And Boston right now, they have their own branded version of the app. They paid a significant extra amount of money to have that, called Park Boston. That same app will still work in Brookline. You can put the Brookline zones into it and it will still work. And right as of the last update that I had on it, there's over 80,000 individual users of the Park Boston app. So it has been
Do we need special permission from Boston to incorporate
Nope.
into them?
No, we don't. It's built on Passport's back-end system. So like I said, with the zone and the spot number, they have different zones than us. So Brookline will have our own zone and our own spots, and they won't conflict at all.
So in our publicity, we should say, hey, Park Boston works here too.
We will definitely be doing that.
Yeah, okay, cool. So you need a vote from us so that we can start moving forward on the cell phone technology?
Yes, on the contract.
Are we ready for a vote?
Well, I'm concerned about the provision that says if we fail to launch within 90 days after the effective date above. I don't see an effective date on here. And I'm looking at the updated version.
Because that has our information filled in, right?
There's no effective date on here.
So, yeah, if we're looking at a midsummer, the effective date can be no sooner than May-ish.
May 1st.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be hard for us to sign this. It's on the first page. Yeah, it's empty. So we have if we just sign it now, we have this liability.
Sure. I didn't catch that either, so we can.
Yeah, and it's
So-
a digital signature as well, so that's something that I can check in for you prior.
Okay, so we're not going to, we'll vote it in conjunction with the public hearing, I guess.
That sounds good.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, discussion? Okay, so stay tuned, and we're going to be having a public hearing on the parking rate increase probably next week. We'll publicize it with the calendar.
All right. Thank you very much.
Moving on to the next item, we're only a half hour behind, is the town clerk's budget. Mr. Ward, welcome. How are things going on the first floor?
Just fine, just fine. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Town Administrator. I'm here before you this evening to present the FY 2017 departmental budget of the Office of the Town Clerk. Now, having said that, that's probably more words than I'll say describing the budget.
You're looking for a big increase.
It's pretty much the same, except for the third election in FY 17, which is slightly offset by the state mandated extended polling hours of $22,000. But essentially, we're funded the same for every other item, except for the anticipated expenses for what we presume will be one heck of a general election in November. And so other than that, I'll be more than willing to take questions, although I do want to comment that there are, I won't say unanticipated, but there's no articulated expenses right now for the early voting that was enacted by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The state legislature, in its wisdom, crafted a piece of legislation that basically didn't make it a mandate, but you've got basically all the major voting organizations in the Commonwealth, Common Cause and the Massachusetts League of Women Voters to be two of them, as well as many people anticipating that they'll be asking more for communities that have larger populations and more registered voters. Currently, right now, there's draft regulations with regards to early voting. And in that, essentially, I mean, the minimum is that we have basically early voting from approximately 11 days out from the presidential election. And that can all be done within the office. Most of the major organizations, and I suspect when the secretary publishes his draft best practices, With communities with larger populations, they will probably suggest that there be more sites available rather than the one in the town hall. And if that's the case, if we do implement that, we're talking more personnel, police detail, and so forth. Another piece of the early voting legislation that isn't mandated, it says that we may have a central tabulation facility, and to allow to count basically the early voting ballots, not at the polling location, but in the central tabulation facility. It wouldn't be necessary if we're talking maybe 1,500 to 2,000 early voting ballots. I suspect it'll be more, but when you're talking about 5,000 or 6,000, that certainly cannot be done at the polling location, particularly with the long lines that are anticipated in the presidential election. So there are some anticipated costs that might occur that we're not funded for yet, but we really don't know until the regulations are really, banged out and we see the best practices memorandum from the Secretary of the Commonwealth.
So are you saying we have another unfunded mandate from our beloved legislature?
It is an unfunded mandate. They've learned their lesson.
Gosh.
I'm shocked.
Selectman Daley?
I noticed on your performance and workload indicators that you were saying of the percentage of eligible registered voters participating, the average is 30%, which sounds good. But I'm always troubled by how low it is on town elections, sort of in the 10% range or something.
That's an aggregate total. I mean, it gets knocked down by the town election. I mean, when you're having a state primary, let's say, presidential primary, we had almost 50%. State primaries probably average between 35%. I suspect that the general election this November will average probably about 85%. But when you get to a town election, that 8 to 15% turnout knocks that average down.
Well, I have long been wondering, and I wonder if you've thought about this at all, if we couldn't set up some kind of educational program in the schools to kind of encourage kids to think about voting and get excited about it, and how, maybe take one of the voting machines over and let them vote, and something like that.
I have offered that a number of occasions and been resoundingly basically ignored. So, I mean, the ones that have taken me up on it are Maimonides, St. Mary's of the Assumption Grammar School, but none of the public grammar schools except for Pierce. Pierce second grade did one, but I've actually sat in a meeting of principals, made my pitch, never heard back from anyone.
Wow. Okay.
So much for civics.
Yeah. I know.
They don't teach civics anymore.
I know a lot of parents take their kids with them.
Yeah, well, I always did, and I remember when my son turned 18, I was very excitedly taking him over to vote, and he's like, "Mom, please, would you stop?"
Well, while I appreciate your interest, I think Selectman Heller is correct that a lot of the civics lessons that are learned by children in this community are taught by their parents when they do bring them to the polling locations. The issue here is, and I think you see it basically on the override local election. There you had 31% turnout, as opposed to the average of like 8 to 10% turnout. So it really matters what's on the ballot and who's on the ballot, and what interests people. And it really is, it's sort of like, it's a step kind of thing. It's, people pay less attention to town elections.
When it's
Some
just
election,
us, it's not that interesting.
some interest in state primaries, some interest in state elections, but when you get into the presidential cycle, every 4 years, it bumps up. Presidential primaries usually average 45 to 50%.
Do you remember what it was in 2008?
2008, it was the same number of voters, but it was less of a percent, it was more of a percentage, but the same number of voters, because at that time, we're required by federal law now to include in calculating the voting turnout inactive voters. We weren't using inactive voters in 2008. So it was, but approximately the same number that turned out, but it was a higher percentage.
Yeah. Any other? Yeah.
I know at one point you were making a concerted effort to purge your voter lists of people who had moved and were deceased and that sort of thing. Have you made progress in that? And where do you think
We
that
make
stands?
progress, we basically make progress every year. It's incremental to some degree because we use essentially the only tool that we have available to us, which is inactivating voters when they don't respond to the street listing. We don't have the resources or the personnel to do anything else, and frankly, I think we're forbidden by federal law to essentially determine somebody's residency by the frequency of their voting. But the way it normally works is that if you respond to the census, you remain active, because it tells us that you're there. And if you don't respond to the census by mid-year, we make you inactive. So the next time you would appear at a voting location, you would have to sign an affidavit and show an ID to show that you still reside at that property.
Having been knocked off once, or...
Well, it's not quite knocked off, you've just been redesignated.
I would like to suggest, though, that it's for somebody who votes in every single election.
And I would love to do
Even
it.
if they fail to send back that census, they should not be considered inactive.
Yeah, but federal law prevents us from doing that, but they're not focusing more on that part of it. They're looking at the reverse side of it, that if you don't vote, you can be removed. And that's what they're concerned about. But the problem that we have is that it also applies to people who vote all the time, but don't respond to the census. So we could conceivably have, in a voting history of a voter, we could have like a dozen elections they voted in, and probably just as many changes from inactive to active to inactive to active, and still never have a response from, say, 2010 in the census. So that happens frequently.
I believe I was chairman at the time when he knocked me off the
That's proof that the chair brings no additional
no respect.
privileges.
Well, and I'll be
Political chicanery.
I will be honest with you, when we first were required to do it, I was reluctant to do it because I saw all the names on the inactive list, but the Justice Department basically pulls no punches. If that's the way we cull our lists, then that's the way we cull our lists. But you're not necessarily knocked off. First of all, we send you a street list, you don't respond to it. When we make you inactive, we're required by federal law to send you a confirmation notice, which is postage prepaid, that all you have to do is sign and say, I still reside here, and then send it back. And you obviously didn't respond to that as either. So when you show up at the next election, you're on the inactive list.
There was much hilarity at the polling place when I was unable to.
And it's something you have to take with a grain of salt.
Was it when you were on the ballot?
I can't remember that.
I'm going to have to not send it back to try it out.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I'll send it back.
I have one question. Maybe there's nothing new in voter registration, but there are no initiatives to increase registration? Or is that an issue in Brookline?
To increase registration?
Right. I mean, you have zero increase for voter registration programs.
What are you referring to?
Was that a budget?
It's a sub-program.
That's a budget.
What page number?
8.1.
Zero funding increase for it. Voter registration, well, we like I said, we're pretty much zero funded except for the actual election. And voter registration also includes census taking, the street listing taking as well. If you're talking about increasing voter registration, we live in a community that probably has some of the most active voters in the Commonwealth.
Okay, I was just asking.
Yeah, and I don't see a necessity to do it because it rises and falls all the time. Brookline's a very fluid community. People move in and out all the time. And that's one of the reasons why we have a high number of inactives, because we're required by law, if they don't respond, we can't take them off, and they have to sit on the list, basically, for 2 successive federal elections before we can remove them. So I don't think we have a problem with voter registration.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments for Mr. Ward? But I'll end with a compliment. We hear in other parts of the country, problems on election day, and we don't hear that. We don't hear that here. So I compliment you.
Well, I thank you. I mean, elections, I think any lawyer that has looked at election laws, 90% of election laws are designed what happens when something goes wrong. you know, and so it's not a perfect system, but we prepare really hard, we train really hard, and we do our best, and I think it shows. Thank you for that compliment.
Well, I mean, I did complain one time, because I think it was the first Barack Obama election, and the lines were very long at my polling place. But I think you fixed that, because it was the question of the people checking you off as you came in to get your ballot, and I think you now have managed to divide up the list in a way that it's going much faster.
I would like to think that. We have been able to do that, divide those lists up in polling locations where we think we can do it. We'll see come the test, you know, come November. Oftentimes, I'll see a long line, and yet I'll see very few people in the voting area voting, and that's a concern for me, because it means they're getting caught up at the front table, and we work with what we have, and we're hoping to make it better, and hopefully November will show that we've done, you know, will show the hard work that it'll pay off.
So,
Could I ask one more
yeah,
question?
sure.
I'm curious about the percentage of voters who are voting absentee. I mean, it's in essence a form of early voting. And I'm just wondering whether that's increased in the past 10 years, say.
Well, it certainly have increased in the past 10 years. I wouldn't say it's rising greatly, but on the average, it's between 1,500 and 3,000, depending on the election. And part of that is because we've established extended absentee voting hours for people.
Yes, those have been very helpful.
Yes, and that will, early voting will show that will be able to provide that for even more people. But and I think certainly in the presidential, I think people will be more focused on voting early than they will standing in line on election day. So yes, I mean it's absentee voting has increased, but it's not going up. It's not going through the roof. But again, early voting for all intents and purposes is absentee voting, and we'll see what happens come November, because we think we're looking at a lot.
I'm looking at that Donald Trump groundswell.
No comment.
No comment.
So, Devotion School is a polling place?
It is. It goes offline in June. We're looking at sites right now. There's still about 2 other locations in that area and those contiguous precincts that I'm looking at.
Okay.
But right now, the best available, I think, that will be available to us would be the fire station at Babcock Street.
Oh,
For temporarily until, Devotion comes back online. But we're also looking, I won't say it out loud because I have yet to contact some of the people, but some temples, a public housing building, but my recollection was the last time I inspected it, it was a very small room. We're looking at a few other places, but there aren't many options for us.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Ward? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next up is DPW. Commissioner Papasturgeon.
Good evening. This is the annual presentation of the Department of Public Works budget, and because our budget is so large and complex, I find it a lot easier to use a few visual aids. We'll start off our budget the presentation this year with just a quick overview of the Department of Public Works organization chart. As you can see, we have 4 major divisions. This coming budget, we are proposed to be budgeted for 163 full-time positions and almost 7 temporary part-time positions that are full-time equivalents. Water and sewer, highway and sanitation, which includes fleet services, parks and open space, and engineering and transportation, all coming under the umbrella of administration. If you look at all these boxes, this is what we call a task chart, an organization chart. It doesn't show actual positions on it. It shows what the tasks are for each division. And you don't have to count them, but I'll tell you that there's 45 of those little boxes. And each one of those is a major element, a task that has to get accomplished within the DPW every single day. There's a lot of work there involved, and I happen to think that our folks do a terrific job at it. We answer to several boards and commissions, as you know, the Transportation Board, Conservation Commission, Park and Rec Commission, Cemetery Trustees, Tree Planting Committee, and the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. My division directors are here tonight in the front row, most of them. Kevin Johnson, our Highway and Sanitation Director, is ill tonight from fighting all that major snow we got yesterday. But my other directors are here, and as we finish up the operating budget and we lead into the CIP, they'll play a larger part in the rest of the evening. Just a quick overview of the total budget, excluding the assessments for MWRA. I take these out of the pie chart because they have a tendency to distort the breakdown of the chart. Water and sewer ends up engulfing nearly all of it when you put the assessments in. But take the assessments out, and this shows you the breakdown by category, administration, and each of the major divisions. Water and sewer certainly still plays a large part of that, as well as highway and sanitation combined, and the remainder of the divisions. The total budget for the department this year, excluding water and sewer, is $14,110,546, broken up as you see on the pie chart. The total expenditures for DPW in terms of category are presented here. Personnel makes up almost 55% of the budget. Services, which is contractual services, another 24%, and then so on and so forth. Capital equipment is generally pretty close to 7%, and that is that $700,000 that you graciously authorize every year for equipment replacements. And then, of course, utilities make up a good chunk of the pie there as well. Just a highlight of some of the changes in our budget as we go forward. The first change is anything you see in red, of course, is a reduction. Slight increase in personnel fixed costs for both salary steps and longevity. That does not include collective bargaining. Nearly $131,000 decrease, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. This is the elimination of 3 sanitation laborers. That's coupled with the automated rubbish collection initiative that we'll be talking about in the coming months. This is what we call the service category of the budget, and I won't bore you with the minor changes, but some of the more substantial ones. Solid waste disposal has gone up $221,000. If you remember last year, we had to get go for a reserve fund transfer to fund the increase in recycling due to the drop in the market. This is now built into the budget. $40,000 has been in the budget for a town hall parking study, and that is for employee parking around the facility. You all see how difficult it is to park here during a workday. $160,000 reduction in banking services. I should explain that this is not a budget reduction, it's a reallocation. That money is coming out of the department budget and being moved to the finance department budget where they rightly belong. It's being consolidated. Just a quick note about the reduction in motor vehicle leases. This $28,000 was actually added to the budget during this fiscal year to cover the rental of our forestry truck that got destroyed in a fire this past year. We had to go out and rent a truck. So that money was added to the budget. We won't need it in FY17 because the new truck has been ordered and it's built into the $700,000.
going forward, so that the, actually shows up as a $28,000 reduction in the budget. Some other major initiatives have dropped, these are mostly utility costs. There's a reduction of 31,000 electricity, and we've kind of attributed that to the LED streetlight replacement program. We're about 2/3 of the way through this program right now. We've already received nearly $100,000 in energy rebates from Eversource, and that's about 25% of what we will receive ultimately. And we are starting to see some savings in the actual energy costs as we update the database with LED lights instead of high-pressure sodium lights. Reductions in gasoline and diesel.
Are you drinking bottled water, Randy?
No, as you notice, this is tap water.
Okay.
It's just a
okay.
container.
All right, just checking.
I apologize, I've had a nagging cold for about 3 weeks, and I can't seem to shake the cough portion of it.
That would be an emergency, right?
You gave it to Mr. Kleckner, right?
I did. Yeah, we're very close. The reduction in gasoline and diesel are pretty much driven by the reduction in contract prices. And once again, a $66,000 reduction in capital equipment. I'm not telling you that we're reducing the 700. That $66,000 was added to the budget this year to make the first year's lease payment on the new forestry truck. So that's built into the budget as part of the $700,000 the remaining 2 years going forward. Total budget change, net decrease of $105,000, or about a little shy of 1%, 0.7%. Quick note about the water and sewer enterprise. This is how that breaks down. As I alluded to earlier, MWRA consumes nearly 70% of the water and sewer budget, which is a pass-through. The rest is broken up just like the rest of the DPW budget is, with the exception of interdepartmental overhead. That's what we pay back to the general fund for overhead costs to run the enterprise. The enterprise does cover its own fringe benefits, which is the 5% you see there. It also covers its own debt service of 7.9%, and we build in a liquidity reserve into the rate structure, which is about 1% of the budget. And the rest are kind of self-explanatory. Summary of changes in water and sewer. Minor changes, because it is an enterprise, we do include money for collective bargaining in the enterprise, unlike the remainder of DPW. That's the $48,000. Some reductions in energy costs, similar trend that we saw in the rest of Public Works. Of course, the big ones, MWRA water assessment and MWRA sewer assessments, almost $700,000 in increase. These are preliminary numbers that were approved by the Board of Directors in February. The board will then review final numbers in June, and I will tell you that the final numbers are generally lower than the February numbers. So this is a slightly conservative total amount. Reductions in debt service really due to the outlay. And capital outlay is what appears, sorry. The capital outlay is what appears in the operating budget for capital. Water and sewer covers its own improvements, be it to the garage or other direct payments made out of the budget. That's what that $442,000 is in capital outlay. About $300,000 of that, I believe, was improvements to the Netherlands Road garage, normal improvements, or $200,000. And then a slight increase, $80,000 in overhead reserves for the reimbursement to the general fund, and normal liquidity reserve increases. Total increase in water and sewer budget is $1.156 million, or about a 5.4% increase going forward. Numbers will change for the assessments, and those will be dealt with at the fall town meeting in terms of budget adjustments going forward. The rate structures going forward will probably, hopefully we'll use the final numbers that are approved in June so that the rates won't have to be adjusted. Just a few quick objectives going forward. Of course, the first one is my favorite, the automated waste collection system using some wheeled carts. And we'll talk a little bit more about that if you wish later. Complete the renovations to the Municipal Service Center that are currently underway. It's been a pretty difficult winter for us up there. Luckily, we didn't have a lot of snow to deal with, but there's a lot of activity, construction activity going on at the garage, dealing with the repairs to the floor and some other construction. We're kind of excited about the third one. We're working on a master plan for improvements to our fire alarm system. Public Works maintains the fire alarm system in town. It's an old system, it's an antiquated system, and we're looking at updating the inventory, trying to identify where the problem areas are, and trying to lay out a plan for what the system should look like going forward.
As so many people have phones now, isn't it more common for people to just dial 911 on their phone?
The answer to that is yes. Most people use their phones. We still have call boxes on the street. They aren't used frequently, and probably their time has come, but this study is going to look at, should we, it's going to answer some questions like, should we eliminate the system? Should we switch the system over to a wireless system, which is generally what's being done in other places? These are a lot of questions that we really can't answer without a thorough review of the system. So we have engaged a consultant who's about halfway through his study right now, and the fire department has been intricately involved in this as well. So you'll see some, depending on what the recommendations are, you'll see some projects perhaps in the CIP going forward in the future. The LED streetlight program, we're hoping to wrap up in the next year with the replacement of all 3,600 streetlights. Pierce and Brookline Avenue.
Skipped one.
I know I skipped it. I'll come back to that.
Okay.
One. Yeah. Pierce and Brookline Avenue playgrounds are going to be under construction this year. Looking forward to those. There was a very detailed design review process that was undertaken on those. The Emerald Necklace Bicycle Ped Crossing is, the contract I believe is awarded, and we're getting ready to get underway on that exciting project. A couple of wastewater initiatives going forward. We have the new US EPA MS4 permit for stormwater about to hit town in the next month or so, and there are some initiatives on that have to be implemented going forward. So we've already begun the planning and the investigation of how the town can best implement the new conditions of the stormwater permit. And of course, we've not only continued our I&I removal program, but we've actually ramped up the program going forward, where we're going to be doing a lot of area-wide slip lining of the sewer system to try to keep groundwater infiltration and stormwater inflow out of our sewers, freeing up sanitary capacity. The high visibility crosswalks has kind of been on our plate for a few years. We've been studying how best our different systems to use that will allow our crosswalks in high visibility areas such as Coolidge Corner, Washington Square, and areas near schools, so that they pop out at you and are more visible for pedestrians, thereby making them safer. We did launch a pilot program a few years ago with a epoxy type material that we used at Coolidge Corner. That has kind of a reddish brick pattern with the white outlines on it, and that has held up very well. It's been in service, I'm going to say, close to 5 years now. and it's held up very well. It still looks as good as the day it was put in. We tried a similar system over here at Washington and Cypress with a different material, more of a coating, which was much less expensive. It didn't last a year. So we're now weighing our options as to, you know, how much do we increase the capital outlay and put in the premium material, and how much that'll reduce our maintenance costs going forward. And I think at some point we'll be coming before you with a complete presentation on what we recommend doing with these high visibility crosswalks throughout town. So that's really the major elements of the Public Works budget. As I said earlier, the directors are here. Just a quick note on, I anticipated perhaps a few questions on pay-as-you-throw and automated collection. So I will tell you that the town administrator did form a study committee made up of some diverse backgrounds around town to try to really drill down and get to the heart of some of the issues. This, you know, automated collection is not such a difficult process going forward, but the whole issue of pay-as-you-throw and using toters is more complex than folks might believe. So, you know, a group was convened, you know, included the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, included some interests. You know, we tried to get folks on the committee that you know, we put out a little bit of rubbish and didn't have a lot of place or room to store a toter, and some folks that had, you know, that have a large family, perhaps live in a single-family home in South Brookline, and try to come up with some concepts as to how we can best roll this program out to satisfy the majority of the needs of the town. And as we were going through the process, it became clear to us that unlike other communities, that we probably were not going to be able to use what we call a default container size. You know, set out one size container, and that's what your refuse fee was going to pay for, and you know, everybody was going to have to just learn to live with it. So we quickly realized that that wasn't going to happen, and we're now drilling down, and we don't have a lot of details yet, but basically what we're doing is we're looking at a system that uses 35-gallon containers, 65-gallon containers, and 95-gallon containers, all priced differently, where folks could choose which container best suits their needs, best suits their ability to handle and maneuver and to store and to handle their rubbish. We haven't quite determined just exactly what the pricing is in this, because coming up with a pricing model is very difficult. One of the premises going forward of the committee was that there should be no net reduction in the current solid waste refuse revenues. So in order to maintain the same revenues that we currently have now with the $200 fee rolled out for 13,000 households, when you start introducing different size containers, it becomes very difficult to estimate, well, how many 35s you think you might have out there, and how many 65s, and how many 95s, and assign a cost to those so that when you add it all up, it still adds up to the revenue that you need to continue. So that's the exercise that we're working on now. There's also another piece, you know, where we're talking about whether or not we should use overflow bags. These are specially imprinted bags with the town logo on it that would be available for purchase. You know, we're going from a system where unlimited amounts of rubbish can be placed at the curb every week to a fine system where there's only a finite amount of rubbish because you know, one of the goals is to, one of the grander goals, of course, is to reduce the amount of waste that we generate and we throw out. So overflow bags present operational problems. They present sometimes other problems, you know, with animals tearing into them, and so there's a lot of issues surrounding the use of overflow bags that we really haven't vetted out yet, but nonetheless, it's still in the mix. Some of the next steps going forward that we see is to prepare a detailed proposal with pricing options for the carts and overflow bags if need be. sometime prior to town meeting this year. Present that all to you, and I would assume, or we would assume that you would hold some sort of public process at that point, including a public hearing, so that you could hear firsthand from the public what their concerns are. And I will tell you there are many, but you need to hear those firsthand as well. And then, depending on what the outcome of that is, we would be prepared to come back to you with a final recommendation, and then hopefully get you to vote final approval. I will tell you that you already approved the transition to automated collection some time ago. We have since ordered the 2 vehicles that were included in the budget this year. They may not be here before, they certainly won't be here before October, and it may even be later than October. And this is the type of program that I wouldn't even want to think about rolling out before the winter. So if the trucks don't come in until, November or so, we would probably not roll this out or implement this program until the following spring, because there's a lot to do in terms of distribution of the toters and doing some public education and things of that nature. So I know that there's not a lot of details here for you to see yet, but I purposely tried to keep it brief, just to give you the highlights and, what we're thinking of right now. At that point, we'll open it up for any questions for directors.
And of course, there's a warrant article, which we're going to be discussing later. So I'm going to suggest to the board that we hold off on pays or throw questions until we talk about the warrant article. I'll start with a few questions. How are we doing with our snow budget? Last night didn't help.
I knew you were going to ask us that. We usually plan, a normal year for us is our average is 43 inches. How it came to be 43 inches, I don't know, but that's what they use, 43 inches. Last year we had 120 inches, so, last year we ran a multi-million-dollar deficit, as you remember. This year, we're just shy of the 43 inches, believe it or not. After the snowfall yesterday, we were at 36.5 inches. So, for the season, it doesn't seem like that much fell, but it did over many different events. We call them events anytime we go into a snow operation. Just putting sanders out for ice control is an event. Plowing a 2-foot blizzard is also an event. So I'll tell you right now, preliminary numbers, I haven't cranked in the numbers from yesterday's storm yet. We haven't had a chance to do that, but prior to yesterday's storm, we were about $500,000 in deficit in the snow budget for this season. We budget for about $400,000 a year for snow and ice control. So, generally we spend a good portion of that money before it even snows, just getting ready for snow. So I think it's manageable this year. We'll cover a lot of that deficit going forward in the next couple of months through surpluses in the Public Works budget. And there may be a certain amount of money that we'll have to request through the reserve fund.
Question, right now, we're considering a complete streets policy, which changes some of our design thinking with respect to our streets. So I guess my question there is, what's the budgetary impact of that, if any, that you can foretell us?
I'm guessing that what we'll see is we're not going to be able to do the mileage that we typically do. If you look in the performance indicators, we average about 5% of the town streets being reconstructed a year, which is about 5 miles a year. We have about 100 miles of streets in the town. So instead of that 5 miles each year, that may drop to 3 miles because we're just guessing, but I'm thinking when we get to streets like Babcock Street, that's going through a very aggressive design that, between the pedestrian safety accommodations and the bike safety accommodations, that's going to take away from basically just milling and overlaying a street.
But, we're doing Babcock Street, irrespective of the complete streets policy.
Right. But it's getting, through the design process, you get a feel that it's going through what a complete street design process might be.
Yeah, I have a question. I think this is for Andy. On your budget statement, that shows the deduction of $130, $570 of 3 sanitation laborers, and that's in connection with going to a more automated system on picking up trash. But it shows the solid waste disposal contract going up by $221,573. So we're not exactly saving money there, are we?
The amount that the contract went up, the amount that the budget went up was because of that contract increase I showed you due to recycling. So, yeah, that was the increasing recycling costs that drove that.
So this says solid waste, but it's not.
Well, it's under the solid waste contractual line item,
Okay.
which includes recycling.
Okay. I noticed in the performance and workload indicators and street light outages, they were estimating 900, but only had 745 in 2015. Is that because we're getting ahead of the curve on the street lights, or why would there be fewer outages than anticipated?
We made a policy decision this year, or over the last 2 years, that anytime we got a street light outage, instead of trying to repair it, that we would replace it with the new LED fixtures. So, even though it was spot in, different points around town, we went out there, and because we have 2/3 of the system now that are LED street lights that are new, we're seeing substantial reductions in the amount of street light outages. So it's all tied to the new program, yes. And, the new LED fixtures, we're hoping will have a life of a minimum of 20 years on the diodes.
And this might be a question for Aaron, but on the landscape improvements to school grounds, including aeration and overseeding, you were estimating you were going to do 45 acres, but only did 23. What was the problem there?
So we're actually revamping our field renovation and rehabilitation program. We're currently working on a plan that will look at not only what our annual program is for fertilization, aeration, overseeding, but deliverables and expectations in terms of programming. So if we do this level of maintenance and we have this many hours of programming, the expected outcomes. So we've been working with the schools and decided to do a pilot where we worked with the Heath School and the Runkle School, both of whom had fields that were in terrible condition, to do what we're calling a sustainable turf management program where they had volunteer rest days. So we worked with them, we did some education. So we focused on those 2 schools to see what the outcome would be, thereby taking a little bit, and we did that very intensively actually, but thereby taking a couple of the other schools off in terms of the intensity of maintenance. And we also had Devotion School off the list, as that will be fully renovated in the upcoming year.
Well, usually at this time of year, I compliment you on the bulb program, but as I looked today, I couldn't see any of them, so
They were great in March.
Yeah, I hope some of them are still there when we get rid of the snow.
Likewise.
Selectman Heller?
To ask about the LED replacement program. I remember when we were contemplating this, and there was some discussion even in town meeting about the brightness of these. And I'm wondering whether you have heard from citizens who are concerned about that issue, whether that has been something that's come to the fore.
There was an issue about the Kelvin temperature of the lights. The higher the Kelvin temperature, the higher the amount of blue light in the spectrum. At the time we went out to bid with this, all the major companies only offered lights with 2 different Kelvin temperatures. One was 5,500 degrees, which is a very bright white, bluish white light. And the other one was 4,000 degrees Kelvin, which is a warmer light. Because of the concerns about the wavelength, we opted to purchase the lower temperature Kelvin temperature lights, which is the 4,000. That's what we've been installing. The whole issue of brightness, we have gotten some complaints that the new street light is too bright, and it happens most of the time when the light is in very close proximity to the building. You know, if a house is right at the sideline of the property and the street light is only 5 or 6 feet away, there were some brightness issues. So in order to address those, we went back in and put a lower wattage fixture in those particular locations. A lot of them were around this area where the houses are so close. And while it's most certainly a different light than the high-pressure sodium, it wasn't as harsh as the higher wattage fixtures. Manufacturers do now make fixtures that have a lower Kelvin temperature, probably around 3,000 or 3,500. We don't want really to, we're locked into this contract for these 3,600 lights, and the best thing for us to do now is to finish the program. And it was always part of this program that at the end we were going to look at the purchase of a smart control system, which is a computerized system that would allow us to go online on Wi-Fi and control each individual light. We could dim it, we could, it would report to us when it needed maintenance and all those sort of things. I opted not to buy that system when we bid it because I felt it was too expensive at the time, but the prices have now come down, so we will entertain that at the end of the program once again. And that will address some of the issues. They have some real innovative concepts like dropping the light percentage, say at 11 p.m. from 100% down to 80% or 75% of the available light. And they're also included, have features that have motion sensors on it. So if you want to go out at 1 o'clock in the morning and walk your dog, as you approach the light, it would power up as you walk by. So there are a lot of exciting things that you can do with a smart control system, so we just really need to get the system done in place and then probably take it to the next level at that point.
How does the reduction in the Kelvin temperature affect the cost of running the bulbs? Is it less expensive or?
No, they're probably pretty much the same. The cost doesn't vary that much. The basic cost is from the manufacturer of the fixture. The LEDs are usually the smallest cost, so putting in a different LED generally doesn't drive the cost. So, we opted not to look at that now. The particular manufacturer we're using doesn't make one at a lower Kelvin temperature yet, but it is in design development. And we didn't think it would be right or fair to start putting in different fixtures now all over town when we haven't even completed the program, because it would really skew the final effect of this, I believe.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll just, one last question. The Fisher Hill Reservoir, when's that? That's an exciting new park.
It is an exciting new park. Erin Galentine, Director of Parks and Open Space. We just had a project meeting with the contractor and consultant team today, going over our punch list of items. There's still certainly a good amount of work to do and some replacement planting. We need to finish the paving and safety surfacing, a couple fences and railings within the park, but we are hoping to have a soft opening, I think, as I mentioned earlier to the board, in June, and then to have a grand opening in the beginning of school. So early September is what we're looking at. I will be before you with an extra work order in the upcoming weeks for completion of the project.
Okay, excellent. We covered the water and sewer, or,
I had a couple questions about it.
yeah, okay. Selectman Daley?
So, it's always a little frustrating as our assessments go up so dramatically every year. And I thought we were paying for the cleaning up Boston Harbor or something like that. When do we get done with some of the legacy costs that have been driving those assessments?
The cleanup of Boston Harbor, or the construction of the Deer Island Treatment Plant, was, of course, a huge capital project. It was budgeted at $6 billion. It was one project that actually came in under budget. The ultimate cost was around $4.5 billion. And that drove up the wastewater costs. You know, there were two components here, water and wastewater. It had nothing to do with the water costs. However, while all that was going on, what people didn't realize was we were also doing capital improvements to the water supply system. We built a new treatment plant in Marlboro to meet the new federal regulations for treating surface water supplies. You realize we get our water from a surface water supply. We also built a brand-new tunnel, a 20-mile-long deep rock tunnel, to provide redundancy to the water system. As it comes in from central Massachusetts. It was one pipeline originally, and if that pipeline lets go, you know, the water supply for 2.5 million people in metropolitan Boston is gone. So while they were building Deer Island, we were building a redundancy to the water supply program as well. We've also upgraded all of the storage facilities in metropolitan Boston. Federal government made it illegal to have open reservoirs. We had a lot of open reservoirs that were storing drinking water. That's illegal now. You can't use open reservoirs, so it required the construction of covered reservoirs or tanks, really big tanks. And that was all going on. These were driving the costs, the assessments on the water side up, and the Deer Island was driving the wastewater system costs up. We had a combined sewer overflow program, of which Brookline received $25 million for the lower Beacon Street sewer separation project, which has been successful for us. So there are a lot of projects that MWRA has undertaken that have driven the cost. And I will tell you that it's not over. The debt service to a lot of these projects, because we're in the 25 year. Believe it or not, it's been, almost 30, it has been 30 years now. So a lot of the debt service costs for the original projects like Deer Island are decreasing, but there are other projects that are adding to the burden. And there's a project on the horizon right now to build another tunnel to provide redundancy to the northern part of the system. That's probably in the magnitude of $700 to $800 million. So that will also drive water costs up again. So I can't tell you that there's ever going to be an end, but I think that the system that we have now for both water and wastewater is second to none.
Well, I had one other question about unaccounted water.
Mm-hmm.
On your estimate, you were estimating 9.8%, and the actual was 19.6%, which is a big gap. I thought, since we've done a lot of work lining our sewers and things, that unaccounted water should be lower.
You want to talk about that a little bit? And where we're going from here?
So, again, Fred Russell, Water and Sewer Director. So the numbers you see there were done prior to, one of the major things that were pointed out to us when we came to you we performed the water audit back 2 years ago. And one of the main components of that was to replace one of the MWRA meters on Fisher Ave. That was just recently done. The numbers that you see, the 19%, were prior to that being done. I just completed the annual statistical report for the DEP that gives us our unaccounted for water, and we're actually at 9.8% this current year, this calendar year. So those numbers were prior to the meter that we suspected was malfunctioning. Now that we've replaced it, the numbers are back down to where we think they should be, so.
The DPW CIP, there's one item. I know the advisory committee has been asking questions about the bike lane on Beacon Street. Now, is this coming out of the coming year's CIP, or?
So we added the DPW CIP to the agenda so that we could, while we have all the division
Right,
directors
right,
here. And I also just did want to provide you with an update on
Okay.
where we are with the advisory committee related to DPW. So, yes, the $36,000 item for bike access improvements has not been voted yet by the advisory committee, but will probably be one of the hottest topics in the CIP this year. So they are basically trying to see whether or not it's possible to do a pilot program using the less expensive paint before fully implementing the program. So the capital subcommittee is scheduling a hearing to discuss the merits of whether or not a program like that would be worthwhile. The rest of the DPW CIP has been voted on by the advisory committee. Couple of things to note. So I think last talked about this with you in December when we had the preliminary CIP. The only change since that point is the parking meter IPS technology upgrade that we had planned for the parking meters. Originally, when it was presented in December, we had all the funding in 1 year. We've now spread that over the course of 5 years in order to make some money available for a feasibility study for the school projects that we're working on. And then the only difference from what was originally presented and what the advisory committee has voted on is that there will be some restrictive language that the capital subcommittee had recommended on the Corey Hill and the Emerson Garden Playground. So those two projects are currently in design review. And so the advisory committee just wanted for the design review process to conclude before moving forward with construction. So that language is part of that vote on those two projects. And Erin said that would not impact where she is in the process for those projects either.
Any other questions on the CIP? We, of course, had our public hearing on the CIP back
in December.
in
Yes.
December, so these are items
The
we've
same
seen before.
issues that you've discussed,
Right.
in terms of the complete streets and the potential impact on the street repair. And of course, Nancy, the single tree hill tank is always a favorite to
I
bring
know,
up.
I was noticing, but we have a year off before it's on there again.
Yeah, I'll be
A
very.
rare break from the,
I'll be very interested in the impact of complete streets. Yeah, and you know, I'm in agreement in principle, in going in that direction, but I think we need to just make sure we're still doing what we need to do in terms of street maintenance. So, you projected a 40% decrease in the number of miles. That's pretty high. Right. So I'll be curious to see what that actual number is in the first year,
I guess the real proof will, when we go, each year we go out and we measure the miles of the streets that we've completed, bring that back, put it in our computer program, and it cranks out a new pavement condition index number. So I think if we see a year or two from now that the PCI is going nowhere, then we know we have a problem. Right now, our PCI is at 69, and I'd like to get to 70 in very short order. And over the last couple of years, we've averaged about a point a year. So I'd like to see us.
So a higher number is better?
Yes. So if we can get to 77 in 7 years, that'll be great. If we don't, then maybe we've got to relook at complete streets.
Can I ask Mr. Ditto while he's there? My street is currently getting redone. I thank you for that after many, many years of you telling me, me telling you how bad my street was. But the gas company has been there working all winter, and I understand the final paving is going to be done when they're done. But are the sidewalks typically done in conjunction with the street?
Yes.
So, because my neighbors have been asking about that, so I can tell
Yeah.
people that
What number is that?
this is Rawson Road.
Yeah, those sidewalks should, actually, I think they may still have yet to be completed.
I don't think any of the sidewalks
Yeah.
have been done, yeah.
Because I think we were focusing on the street itself when
Yeah.
we first went in there, and then we come back and do the sidewalks afterwards.
Okay, so we can anticipate that they
Yeah.
will be done as part of the project.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Papsturgeon, Mr. Ditto, Mr. Russell, and Ms. Galantine. I presume some of you are sticking around for the Article 17 discussion. Okay, moving on to warrant articles. I apologize for the late hour. Article 4, Ms. Goff.
Hello. You should have at your places a summary provided by department heads on the current status of special appropriations, both bond-funded and revenue-financed. This is an annual exercise associated with Article 4 that basically allows departments to indicate whether or not they have finished with these projects. And if they are done, then the comptroller will close out the balance at the end of the fiscal year. So if you have any additional questions, typically no action is needed under this article. It's just for the purpose of getting the status update from departments.
Any questions on
And
this warrant article?
next week, we can have, if there's, in between now and next week, when we vote on this, if there's additional questions,
Right.
feel free to reach out to me.
Anyone, this is a public hearing. Anyone wish to speak on Article 4? I see none, so we'll move.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So, give me an example of what happens to to something that's a surplus. I see something here, I assume that the ones that say completed or complete are done, and then you have to figure out what to do with the money, if there is any.
So if they indicate that it's complete and there's a balance in the account, that would fall to free cash at the end of the year.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Oh, if it were a bond-funded account, we'd have to rescind the bond authorization, but for the revenue-financed accounts, that's how that works.
Okay, we ready to move on? We'll take Articles 15 and 16 together, I guess, since they relate to the same project, though they're slightly different. Mr. Ditto.
Yes, both these warrant articles have to deal with easements that we need to gain for reconstruction of Carlton Street footbridge. The first one, Article 15, is for a permanent easement on the town land, as well as a temporary construction easement on town land. Now, that might sound a little bit bizarre in the town's giving an easement to itself, but the issue here is that this is federal money. 80% of this project is going to be funded with federal money, and the remaining 20% by state money. And the federal guidelines are very specific as far as gaining access to and maintaining access to the construction site. So the permanent easement really has to do with the feds wanting to make sure that their investment's going to be around years to come. And I guess you can maybe say the best way to sum this up is permanent easements are effectively a dedication of town property for the purpose of accommodating and providing access to the footbridge. So that's where they're coming from on that one. The temporary construction easement is a comfort to the feds that they know we designated this land, and basically it's the portion of, well, the construction site area will be on the riverside of the bridge. And it'll be about a laydown area of maybe 300 or 400 feet long by about 75 feet wide. So we've identified that as the area that we want to use that for the construction laydown. That takes care of Article 15. I don't know if you want to stop here and
Yeah,
fire away
any
or move on.
questions on Article 15? Keep going, Mr. Ditto.
Here we go. Article 16 is 2 easements, temporary construction easements, and they're with the MBTA and the city of Boston. We're going to hopefully gain access to this site off of Park Drive on that pathway that runs from Park Drive down to the bridge, goes by the DCR maintenance facility. And the other easement is a temporary construction easement on the site itself from the MBTA. So this requires the town meeting approval for the selectmen to move forward with this. Both these do.
So I note that in the language is an appropriation of funds of an unspecified amount. Do we expect that we're going to need to pay the MBTA?
City of Boston, I'm not concerned with. We have a good working relationship. I'd be very surprised if they require any kind of funding from us. MBTA, on the other hand, they're not so gracious. So,
I mean, we've been told repeatedly that this bridge is kind of in danger of falling down on their trains.
yeah.
They should be paying us.
Yeah, that same question came up on the advisory subcommittee earlier tonight, and it's something I have to look into tomorrow to find out, what's the scoop, what's going to happen here? Are they going to hit us for damages? Or are they going to say this is an impediment on their part? So there's more to come on that. But history has it that they do hit us for sum of money.
Right,
Well, I mean, I think we should bargain hard on this, because I think we're doing them a favor.
Yeah,
by,
and
removing something that could be very dangerous to their
yeah,
operations.
yeah, it's a good point.
I would be more comfortable if there were an amount in here, but if that's possible.
Well, I'm going to try to.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to establish that tomorrow. So.
I presume both of these will require a 2/3 vote of town meeting, since they're easements, yeah. So besides the amount question, any other questions on Article 16? This is a public hearing. Anyone wish to speak on Articles 15 and 16? I see none. I think we can move on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ditto. Article 17, Mr. Friedman. Sorry to keep you up this late.
No, this is the third group we've appeared before tonight, so I'm getting somewhat practiced at this. Do you want me to explain it?
Please.
Okay. So it's my understanding that the town is moving towards mechanization of garbage pickup. My understanding is the trucks have already been ordered and will arrive at some point in the not-too-distant future. And the way the mechanization works is that we will be using some size or sizes of toter carts, which are similar to the ones we currently use for recycling. The toter carts are perfect vehicles when you have a single-family home with a garage in which to store them, a driveway down which you can roll them, and a place at the street at which you can put them. However, various neighborhoods in Brookline are not described in that way. My street, for example, is attached row houses. There are no garages on my street. With one exception, there are no driveways on my street. There are no accessible backyards on my street. There are no side yards on my street. We have a small strip of land in the front. So what this means when one uses toters is one of three things happen. One, and this has happened up and down the street and in the neighborhood, is that because of a lack of storage, you put your toters in front of the building. So that what was once a really charming looking street is now occupied by a great number of toters 24/7 every week of the year. For instance, my next door neighbor has 3 very large toters between the entrance to their basement and the sidewalk that live there permanently, except the 1 day a week when they're actually on the public sidewalk. That's one thing that can happen. The second thing that can happen is what's happened in my building, that we do have basements in which you can store the toters. However, basement space is rather limited, often because there's living quarters in the basement. And on my street, for example, on my side of the street, to get from the basement up to ground level, you have to go upstairs, 3 stairs in my building. On the other side of the street, to get from the sidewalk to the basement entrance, you have to go up concrete stairs. And I will note that on my side of the street, the door that leads from the basement to the street is only about 3 feet high. So it becomes A, a storage issue, and B, trying to get these rather unwieldy toters out of your basement, onto the street, and back again. My building uses the small toters, 32 or 34 gallons. Those are 20 pounds empty and are rather unwieldy when you're schlepping them upstairs. Other people on the street use the 65-gallon ones. Those are closer to 30 pounds. I believe they're 28 pounds empty. So they're hard to do. So the third option is what I assume some people do, which is you simply don't recycle because you can't deal with the toters. So given that the town is going in this direction, and given that everybody in the town seems to acknowledge that there are certain situations where the toter is neither practical nor useful from a consumer's point of view, the warrant article requests that the DPW come up with a series of exceptions so that those of us who either because of physical ailments, and I have to say that as the years go by, since I'm not getting any younger, getting that toter up the basement stairs and back down the basement stairs is getting more and more difficult. And it's an empty toter. It's not full because I can't cope with that one at all. So for those of us who either physically can't do it or whose property is such that there's nowhere to put these things other than out front, we're asking for exceptions so that the mechanization can go forward where the mechanization will work, and that an exception system be done where the mechanization system using the toters does not work. I debated a warrant article which would have mandated this. I chose to go the resolution route because I have trust that the town and the DPW are aware of these instances and will act in good faith in coming up with a system that works for everybody. I would also mention that mechanization resolution is not anti-pay-as-you-throw. Personally, if I had to pay as I threw, I would pay practically nothing because I use half of a small kitchen trash bag each week. The fact that I would then have to take that very small bag and put it in a toter is where the inconvenience is to me. You can have pay-as-you-throw without mechanization. You just continue to use bags that you pay for. And I have now, my feeling is, a way to dispose of garbage that's pretty perfect in that it works. I can easily get the garbage from my second floor unit down to the street. I can then take an empty, lightweight plastic garbage can out of the basement that I can get up the steps, put it on the street, put my garbage in it, and then when the garbage men come, I can put that plastic can back in the basement. If I need multiple plastic cans, I can stack them, I can nest them. I can't do that with the toters. They take up more space and they're unwieldy. So I'm hoping that what we end up with, whether the town, when the town does go to mechanization, is that I and people like me will continue to have a system that continues to work for us without putting out our garbage every week an ordeal. And that's pretty much it.
Okay. I know we have a working group that's looking at this.
Well, the working group was a task force that I created, and in fact, we invited Mr. Friedman to appear, and he did. But the working group really has concluded their efforts, and it's really back now to the Department of Public Works and I to develop a system, and we fully expected that this issue would come before the board, and that through the process of public input and engagement that you would consider that. So we're not predisposing any issue about this. I will say, obviously, that exceptions to a system of this magnitude are difficult, but we have an open mind, and I assume the board will also provide some policy direction in this area.
Did the commissioner want to respond?
No. Selectman
I
Heller?
have a question. So, I know in San Francisco, they use a system of 3 different toters: a recycling toter, a composting toter, and a trash toter. And I'm wondering what they do. I mean, that is a city. It's got a lot of different kinds of housing and buildings and issues with basements and things. So I'm just wondering if you know, or perhaps the commissioner knows, how San Francisco has resolved this issue.
I can say that I really have no knowledge, not only of San Francisco, or of what other towns here in the
Or
Commonwealth have
any
done.
other place.
Yeah, I really don't know.
I don't know specifically what San Francisco does. I do know that a lot of communities across the country have implemented automated collection with toters. Large cities, small towns, they've all done it. There are a lot of cities that collect garbage. There's a difference between municipal solid waste and recycling and food waste. Food waste is what we used to call garbage. They have a separate collection for garbage. It's in its own small sealed container. That has not caught on around here yet, although the DEP is taking stabs at starting to mandate or the removal of garbage from the waste stream. The problem around here is there's no place to take it to get rid of it on a large scale. There was an idea floated a while back about getting the food waste into the digesters at the treatment plant at Deer Island, but that requires the construction of infrastructure to handle all that, and they're not there yet. So nobody that I know of around this part of the country is going to separate food waste collection, although I'm convinced that in the future it's absolutely going to happen and it's going to be mandated, and we'll have to deal with that.
There are obviously communities around us that do the automated collection. I believe the City of Newton does, and we're looking at it, definitely looking at what realistic, practical exceptions
I
there
would
could
be
be.
curious as to the exceptions that those communities, other communities like us give, if any.
We did a survey of all the communities in Massachusetts that do automated collection, and we asked them specifically, do you make exceptions? And for the most part, very few of them did, and some of the exceptions that they noted to us were You know, that they had standardized on 64-gallon carts, and they would allow people to have 35-gallon carts. That was their exception. There were some also well, I don't know of any that allowed purely the use of plastic bags as an exception. There were some that had an amnesty collection, you know, like one day out of the quarter or something, where you could put, you know, all the trash you wanted out. But very few exceptions to all the communities locally that use automated collection.
Thank you.
Well, I think
We've got a couple speakers.
yeah. No, I think you're going to need to state what your recommendation's going to be prior to town meeting.
Yeah, we're fully aware of that.
Okay.
This is a very complex issue, and one of the goals is, as I said earlier, is to it has to be revenue neutral. So when you roll out multiple size containers, you have to make some assumptions as to how many of each size you're going to get out there to try to get an estimate of what your revenue is going to be. It's very difficult to do. So there's a lot of work involved here.
Okay, public hearing. Anyone who wants to speak, come on up.
Hello, I'm Susan Granoff. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 7. I was also privileged to be on the 6-person special task force that Mel and Andy have mentioned, and that we operated for 2 months during January through mid-March. One of the things that I made very clear from the very first meeting that I attended was that my approval of automation was contingent on there being some kind of accommodation made for seniors and people with physical disabilities who simply lack the physical capacity to pull up or carry one of the 35-gallon toters, which weighs empty 20 pounds. For those people who live in an area where there is direct access on a level surface from where they store the toter to the sidewalk where they're collected, this isn't a problem. But for those people who live in areas, as Resolution 17 mentions, where the living configuration is such that they either have to bring it upstairs or downstairs or carry it from one place to another. The fact that we're going to automation means that there's going to be a really undue burden placed on our most vulnerable populations. Those, do you really want an 80-year-old person carrying a 20-plus pound toter up and down stairs with balance issues on a weekly basis? I think that we as a community are not just rational, but we're also compassionate. And we really care about those parts of our community who don't fit into the norm. The other aspect that I think we need to consider, and as an attorney I'm really well aware of this, is that if we don't have some kind of exception or accommodation for people with physical disabilities or people who are seniors, who are physically incapable of managing the toter, we expose ourselves to lawsuits, possibly even a class action lawsuit. So I think that it would really be in our best interest to come up with some kind of exception that we will then require people to apply for. I don't think there are that many people who are going to fall into the category of needing this exception, but I think it's really critical that we have that on the books someplace. I actually, as part of the committee, I went around asking people their opinion about how they would deal with automation and what it would mean to them. Most people don't realize that with automation, no one is actually going to be allowed to put any plastic bags on the curbside. for collection. Even overflow bags cannot be directly picked up by one of the mechanized trucks that are going to be used to pick up automated carts. They have to be placed in a cart, so that the idea that someone such as Harry, for example, or many other seniors who only produce maybe half a bag of a 12-gallon kitchen bag, being required to put that into a heavy toter and then carry it outside, I think is really insensitive to the needs of these people's physical limitations. I also think that when we give people a situation where it's impossible for them to follow the law, we are going to set up a situation where they're going to find ways to break the law, and I think that's a bad precedent to set. People are going to maybe be sneaking around, putting their trash into other people's trash bins, or they're going to find ways around it. And of course, unlike recyclables, trash has to be put out on the curb each week. It's unhygienic and unsanitary, particularly now that we don't have a separate collection for food waste. This needs to be picked up each week, so it's a burden that has to be done on a weekly basis. Finally, I think that some of the feedback that I got was very revealing. I spoke to one of the managers at Brookline Bank in Coolidge Corner, and she told me that she's lived in Brookline all of her life. And when I asked her how she thought automation would affect her, she said, oh no, she doesn't know how her parents are going to manage. They've lived in South Brookline since 1972 in a single-family home. He's now 88, she's 84, and he prides himself on his independence and on being able to take out his garbage each week. And they live in a single-family house that has a set of steps down to the sidewalk. This is what the house looks like. They have a small single-car garage where there's not enough room for a toter and a car at the same time. So that switching over to automation without giving people like these an exception is going to be extremely burdensome. And so for those reasons, I really urge that the DPW come up with an accommodation that is a practical one. It doesn't have to be an elaborate one. People, for example, who are applying for an exception could register their address, and the DPW could come up with their own separate collection route for those people who have been allowed to be part of this accepted group. Therefore, they wouldn't require somebody to do this every single day of the week. There could be a one day of the week where everyone who is part of this accepted group can put out their little plastic bag and someone will come around and pick up the bag. So it doesn't have to be an elaborate thing. It doesn't have to be especially costly. But I do think that that should be considered a cost of a natural cost of going over to an entirely new system of garbage collection, particularly affecting those people who have lived in Brookline the longest, people who have lived here for decades.
Okay, thank you. Of course, the more exceptions, the more the costs, so we're going to have to balance that and
Right. When you
pass it on.
Right. When you decided
But-
on automation, I'm curious, were you given the revised figures for the cost savings that automation brings? Because as part of our committee, we actually realized that the initial figure of $2.2 million over 10 years was actually not correct. And
Okay.
Andy did up a new one where the actual cost savings are under $99,000 per year.
Okay, well, we will have to consider that.
Okay, if you need them.
Ms. Stewart?
Yes, in his remarks, Harry alluded to the fact that his once lovely street had been, many people were putting these beneficial recycling toters out in their front yard because there was no other space in their community. And that's in his particular block, and that's similar also where I live on Toxteth Street. For example, there's an apartment building, an absentee landlord happens to live there, and his tenants were for 3 years instructed to keep their recycling toters in the front yard, in spite of repeated requests by me to find another solution. And the specter now of having mechanized toters, needing to be picked up by automation. It's a 6-unit building, and luckily they only had 4 big recycling bins in their front yard. But now there's the specter of 6 additional toters for each unit, or maybe a combination of even a 96 gallon size toter in the front yard. And I think this is one of the unintended consequences of trying to save money, of mechanizing a system that is a wonderful system as it is now. I mean, I applaud the way we handle our recycling, and the vision of trying to reduce the amount of waste is so admirable. As a climate activist, I'm thrilled that people are feeling responsible for the environment, but there are these tangible unintended consequences, and it's not just this neighbor next door that's an apartment building, but out of convenience, other neighbors are put on their front porch their recycling toter and their other things. And it's not unusual for people to live out of convenience rather than consideration. And I know that in Brookline now, I learned when I went to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, what can I do? That there is no bylaw, for example, right now you can put anything in your front yard apparently in Brookline except for a car set up on blocks. I think someone told me that there is a bylaw about that. But I think we've had these unintended consequences, and this combination of trying to do automation with pay-as-you-throw, which was rejected twice by town meeting. And it's an admirable goal, but we have these complicated scenarios where human beings and communities and aging people and people who care about the way their property values are being affected by the proliferation of barrels potentially. It's a cause for concern, and I think we have to look really carefully at these consequences.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Eric McNulty from Claflin Road, 20 Claflin Road, neighbor of Harry. I do want to agree with what all the previous 3 speakers said and just say, first of all, as the son of a former DPW director from the city of Gloucester, I appreciate the complexity of this issue as well as the emotions that it brings forward. I just want to say, add one thing, which is that one of the things I have heard over the multiple meetings I've attended is, we did this with recycling and it worked out, we'll figure this out too. Well, as we've heard over and over again tonight, and as I've seen in my neighborhood, just because you found room for 3 recycling totes doesn't mean there's room for 3 more bins. Doesn't mean because you can haul out relatively light recyclables, empty cans, empty bottles, you can also do the same thing with much heavier solid waste. I did learn through the process that at one point there was a bylaw passed to limit the size of the existing plastic trash barrels we're supposed to use because there was concern over the weight that the workers would have to lift to get it in the truck. Well, now with a bin that starts at 20 for a small bin or 30 pounds for a larger one, you're asking citizens to lift perhaps more weight than you asked your own workers to lift. So there's many considerations that go into this besides, will it work with the truck? Will it work with the automation? And I urge you to make this as public as possible, as soon as possible, because my neighbors, when they learn about it, aren't happy. And it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure we're leading on this issue and not playing catch up later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
Neil, can I just add one editorial thing?
Okay.
The advisory subcommittee met tonight. The last resolve about financial things has come out.
Is what?
I deleted it.
Okay. Okay, so we'll be voting this another night. I don't know exactly when. Thank you all. And the last item on our agenda is the Roland Hayes late-breaking advisory committee news.
So what you have in front of you, your double-sided page, is what the full advisory committee voted at the meeting last week. They've got some clauses that were struck, and then the word pattern was replaced with history. So this is the advisory version of that warrant article.
So they changed, whereas he refused to be diminished or denied in a country rife with racism, they just moved it, right? Still
They-
there, but they moved it, okay.
Where'd that move to?
It's down.
Oh,
down
oh,
below.
okay.
Oh, you have it? Okay.
Got it.
Encourages, okay.
And then,
No, it is the one I have.
Okay. Yeah, then there's some changes in the now therefore be it
I can
resolved.
explain the changes, they're quite simple.
okay,
Rob Daves, I'm on the Hidden Brookline Committee. The first change is the fifth whereas. It's just been pushed, pushed down below the sixth one. It just seemed, it was I guess an English teacher on the committee that thought it made more sense to have it in that position. The last whereas clause, past pattern's been changed to history. Some people wanted to debate if there was a difference in connotation there. Petitioners wanted to leave it in place, but it's not, we're fine with this. And then the first resolve clause, it just, again, it's just a change in style, encourages instead of call upon. That seems, and because encouraged is used throughout the rest of the resolve clause, just to be parallel. The second resolve clause, this is something that came up with the school committee. The way it was written, it seems to say that the school committee can set curriculum. They do not do that, and they also do not want to recommend the curriculum. So it was changed to town meeting encourages the teaching of the music and legacy of Roland Hayes, and it's broad, it's open, it's all encompassing, and it offends nobody, but it kind of gets the idea across.
fine.
Yeah,
And then, and then the third resolve clause, again, is just to make it parallel, it encourages the people of Brookline. It just simplifies it a little bit. And then at the very bottom, the last resolve clause, it said citizens, and we use the word people, because people is more inclusive, citizens is actually a subset, so.
Okay, I'll move favorable action on
Okay,
the
so
advisory committees.
I'm just going to revise the motion to remove this, to see if the town will adopt, which is the standard way you frame these things, and then remove the or take any action relative thereto at the end. So that'll be Selectman Daley's motion.
Yes.
All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. That was easy.
Thank you.
And that concludes our business for tonight.
Good job, Rob.
Barbara Brown,